and the last amendments are dated 3. And FCC TV is good to go, so I'll read the notice for you and do roll call. The meeting for which this agenda has been posted will be held pursuant to and in compliance with the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.2-3708.2, and state and local legislation adopted to allow for continued government operation during COVID-19 declared emergency. All participating members of City Council and other boards will be present at this meeting through electronic means, and members of the public can view the meeting at www.fallschurch.gov/councilmeetings, as well as on FCC TV, Cox 11, RCN 2, and Verizon 35. City Council work sessions are conducted to allow council members to discuss upcoming legislation and policy issues. The public is not generally invited to speak. Public comment may be sent to cityclerk@fallschurchva.gov, and all comments are provided in full to the members of council and will be summarized at the next regular City Council meeting. As for roll call, let me start with Ms. Connolly.
Here.
Mr. Duncan.
Yes, here.
Ms. Hardy.
Here.
Ms. Leon.
Here.
Ms. Sean Siscott.
She is will be joining us shortly. She is at the doing some duties at the basketball game, the girls' final basketball game. So she will be joining us, I think, in the next half hour to hour.
Thank you, Mayor. And Mr. Snyder?
Here.
And Mayor Tarter?
Here.
Great. Thank you, Mayor.
All right. Thank you. So we do have a busy agenda. Before we get on the agenda, I know people are very concerned about the situation in Ukraine, and the idea is that our next meeting, our regular meeting, we might consider a resolution in support of the people of Ukraine. And I know Mr. Snyder may have some remarks he'd like to make now, and I'll give him and anyone else an opportunity to speak if they would like. So, Dave, do you have anything you want to say at this time?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. It's hard to find the right words to describe the brutality and the savagery that the president of Russia has unleashed on the people of Ukraine. Our city feels, I believe, and the city council feels a great deal of empathy for those who are suffering, and we have a strong tradition of welcoming refugees of all sorts and from all conditions, and therefore I think it might be appropriate for the city of Falls Church and our community, along with welcoming Falls Church and other interested groups, to make clear our receptivity and willing to assist in the humanitarian challenge. Some have likened this to the greatest refugee crisis since World War II, certainly in Europe. So in any event, I think it's appropriate that we take some formal action to reiterate our city's desire to support refugees from all wars and from all different conditions, and especially this one. Finally, as public officials, you have to look on with admiration to the work of the public officials in the Ukraine who continued their government work and their resistance to the Russian invasion. So thanks very much, Mr. Mayor.
Sure, and thank you for taking the lead on this resolution for next week. And again, we don't do resolutions for the public at work sessions. They're not what we call regular meetings, but our next regular meeting is next Monday, and we will consider that at that time. But I know there's broad support for such a measure. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to say? Looks like there is a hand up. Let me find out whose that is. Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. So I wholeheartedly support what Dave said, and thank you for taking the lead on that, Dave. I'd also be interested in kind of following up our kind of support with some tangible budget dollars. I know that Welcoming Falls Church and others have been looking at ways how we can house refugees in the city, and if that requires a specific budget ask, I think in times of crisis, we're always looking for real ways that we can actually show that we're welcoming, and I think a good way to do that would be in housing support. So I want to at least express my support for something like that. More discussion with our staff.
All right, thank you. Any other comments? If not, I propose we observe a moment of silence to show our support for the men and women of Ukraine who are bravely fighting Russian aggression, and more broadly, to reject those who seek to bring about a new era of authoritarianism in an age of strongmen. Let us remember how fragile.
Mayor, we
Did I
lost your audio.
Oh, okay, sorry. I was just saying that I don't know how far along I got, but basically I was speaking about the crisis in Ukraine and asked for a moment of silence to show our support for the people of Ukraine, and more broadly to reject those who seek to bring about an era of authoritarianism and an age of strongmen. We need to remember how fragile democracy here is, both here and elsewhere, and that it must be defended against misinformation, lies, corruption, aggression, and violence. So today, I think we all stand shoulder to shoulder with the people of Ukraine, and I would ask we could just start the meeting with a moment of silence on their behalf and in their defense. All right, thank you. So more to come on that, certainly. But let's go ahead and get on to the work session. Mr. Shields, do you want to start with Founders Row or Founders Row 1 in the movie theater?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Tarter and members of council and members of the public who are watching. So we do have the Founders Row 2 project on the agenda, but before we get to that, I will provide some additional information about the commercial lease up on Founders Row 1, and we do have a representative of Mill Creek, Joe Muffler, who can also expand on that if there are any questions that the City Council has on Founders Row 1 and the commercial lease up there. When we do get to the Founders Row 2 item, we will have a staff report led by Jeff Hollern, who's our lead planner on this case. We will also will have a presentation by the developer. And the presentation by the developer is a bit more detailed than the last ones that you've gotten, and that's at the request of some council members who want to kind of know some of the details in terms of things that have been discussed with boards and commissions and how the developers responded to those. So the developer has been asked to provide that information in his presentation. Before we get to Founders Row 2, then just to circle back on the commercial lease up for Founders Row 1, and very importantly, with respect to the theater, and the developer, I think, could provide additional information and did provide additional information on Thursday to the EDC, kind of about the general picture of the commercial lease up, and I'll let him speak to that. But in terms of the theater incentive, Ms. Mester, and I apologize for putting you on the spot, but I did. There it is. Thank you. So I just have 3 slides that will just remind those who were here at the time and inform those who've never heard of this incentive of what it was. And the point of this presentation is to note that the Mill Creek Development Partnership is requesting for an expansion of this incentive. So I'll describe what that is, and that request now is in writing addressed to the city. So in terms of background, the economics of a theater have always been challenging in this location, and in acknowledgement of that, the City Council approved in 2016 an economic development agreement, and it was a 3-way agreement between Mill Creek, the Economic Development Authority, and the City Council. And in that agreement, it stood for the proposition that there would be a theater tax imposed on gate receipts for the movie theater, and that tax is 10% of the ticket price. So the revenues from that tax, the first $20,000 would be retained by the city. The portion of theater tax receipts between $20,000 and $360,000 would be paid to the city in an equivalent amount that would be granted to the developer by the city's Economic Development Authority. So that result, the effect of that was a $340,000 annual benefit to the developer to help address some of the difficult economics of leasing that space to begin with. That's the anchor use for the commercial components of this project. And then any theater tax receipts above $360,000 are not eligible for the grant, i.e. they'd be retained by the city. This was a 20-year term agreement, and it did have a provision in there of a 3% annual increase to both the city's share, that $20,000, plus the developer's share of the $340,000 above that. Now, that agreement had a clause in it that it would automatically terminate if the theater was not open by January 1, 2021. So as of today, there is no agreement. That agreement is terminated. Next slide, Cindy. So the request from Mill Creek, which we've now received in writing, is to expand this incentive in 2 important ways. One, to extend the term of that agreement from 20 years to 30 years. And second, to add meals tax receipts to the incentive program, which would be capped at $150,000 per year. So the annual benefit on top of the $340K per year for the theater admissions tax, in addition, there would be this $150,000. So the total benefit would be $490,000 per the request that's been made by Mill Creek. The stated reason for this request is that relative to 2016, the economics for a theater have gotten worse, and the development team can provide information on that. We will do the city's own independent analysis of those facts and the numbers behind it as well. So the last slide that I would just note is some of the technical analysis that staff is prepared to do on this proposal. One is to review the proposal against city adopted policy. And the City Council has adopted policy on financial incentives for commercial redevelopment, and that was done by resolution in 2011. But that resolution really did lay out very good sound requirements and tests for any incentive program that the City Council might consider. So we'd compare it against that policy. 2, there needs to be a legal analysis. The laws might have changed since 2016 when this was first contemplated, so we'll check against that. But also the legal question of expanding the agreement to include meals taxes. So that's a legal analysis that will need to be done. And then lastly, what I referenced just a moment ago is we will do an independent financial analysis of the economics of the project to help assess the need for this incentive. So I wanted to provide that update. That's the report that I have. Wanted to just have all the facts be out there public and certainly before the City Council so that you know the state of play. And Mayor, if there's a need for additional information, I'd just note that Mr. Muffler is available to answer any questions as well. I'll stop there for the moment.
All right, so let's go ahead and open up to questions and comments from council. Any questions or comments on what we've just heard? Ms. Hardy?
Just a quick one. Wyatt, when do we expect those 3 streams of analysis to complete?
So we have been in discussion with our financial analyst so that they were kind of expecting that this work might come to them. So that can be started immediately. I'll need to speak with the city attorney just in terms of the legal analysis. And I think for the City Council adopted policy, we'll just compare that, and that'll be staff work. And of course, the City Council will make the judgment finally in terms of how this conforms or doesn't to adopted policy. I think it can be done relatively quickly is sort of, I've given a long answer, but I think that's the long and short of it. I would think probably in 2 weeks.
Okay, and then a question for Mr. Muffler. So is all work stopped at Founders One while you wait to hear kind of the city's response on this, or what other kind of progress are we showing in the meantime?
Yeah, no, thank you. No, we are actively working. As you all are typing, I'm reviewing lease comments in the background and was just reviewing updated signage. So I'd say there's a handful of balls in the air, right? The good news is that everything is advancing. We are still firmly committed to pushing this forward. We have lease negotiations, which are ongoing and moving very well. We have redesign efforts of the theater space. I think I've mentioned in previous meetings that this theater operator will be bringing a premium large format screen to the theater. IMAX similar, just not IMAX branded. That will necessitate some redesign efforts. They need to get signage on Broad Street, so we need to work with staff on that. And then there's the tax reimbursement as well. In addition to things like hiring a GC for this, we have paid out of our pocket to have their architect advance drawings so that we can hire a GC and go through the process. So the long story short, Ms. Hardy, is that yes, we are working very hard to continue to push this thing forward. And I'm happy to answer any other questions on this, but I don't want to talk over your question.
All right. Mr. Snyder?
Sure. So I think in terms of reviewing this, it's important to review all the terms in the original agreement, as well as places where the City Council, although I didn't vote for it, the City Council has provided additional leniency to the developer. And I understand here that what we'd be committing to is about an additional $1.5 million in subsidy to the developer in order to get this at the least. And then and I note that most of the vast majority of the commercial spaces remain unoccupied, although we've heard or read in the newspaper some leases have been issued. And what's the percentage of this commercial square footage in this development that's now occupied and fully functioning? Question number one. Question number two, what percentage of the total commercial square footage is leased? And then finally, I think we need more of a history of this project to show that the developer has consistently not met its originally agreed to elements of the commercial project with regard to Founders Row 1. And a final comment, until things are fully complied with, I believe that the best approach is not to move on Founders Row 2 until we have 100% of the commercial spaces occupied and this theater far more guaranteed than it is now. Thank you.
Okay. So what is the amount? He asked a few questions. One is how much is what's the total commercial GFA in this space?
So the amount of commercial that Mill Creek owns, because if you may recall, there is a subsection that we do not own, is 80,000 square feet.
When you say you don't own, what section is that?
If you recall, there was a nuance in this where there is another owner who owns about 5,000 square feet of commercial along with 5,000 square feet of office space.
Who is that owner?
It was the previous landowner that was involved in this transaction.
So, I mean, there's one approval for this building, right?
Correct.
There's not two
So-
approvals. So, I mean, parsing that out, I don't think helps us. And frankly, I'm not sure it helps you either. So how much?
Of the 85,000 square feet that is, sorry, I'm doing math as we talk. Of the 85,000 square feet that is existing, 18% is under lease. None of it is occupied. That 20%, or sorry, 18% that is at lease is all in design and review for permits. So work will begin on that shortly thereafter. In addition to that, another 34,000 square feet, which includes the theater, which is equivalent to 40%, is at LOI. And then, as I've mentioned in previous meetings, there's about 15% that is in advanced negotiations where we hope to sign LOIs here in the near future. So if you add that all up, approximately 75% of the retail is at least at a term sheet or in advanced negotiations.
Got it. Okay. And people can draw their own conclusion. A letter of intent, of course, is non-binding on either the tenant or the landlord, but it is an indication that there are, advanced discussions going on. Does other people have comments or questions? Okay, then I will have a few. One, let me just say this to Mr. Shields. In the financial analysis that should occur is not solely on the movie theater. The movie theater was never a standalone deal. It was part and parcel of a larger parcel, a project. And we knew that the movie theater wouldn't stand on its own 2 feet financially, but would require subsidies from the residential portion of this project. And so to my mind, part of the analysis is not just, is the movie theater worse off than it was 3 years ago? And I think everyone would agree the answer is yes. That needs to be compared with the residential side. And is the residential side better than it was before, worse off than it was 2 or 3 years ago, or the same? My hunch is that the residential portion of this project is probably doing better than anticipated. I don't know that, and I would certainly welcome our financial analysts' thoughts on that. But I would just want to make sure that our analysis of the movie theater doesn't stop with the movie theater, because it was always part and parcel to be subsidized by the rest of the project.
I agree with that, and that's the scope of work of the analysis. And so when I answered before that, the analysis, we're hopeful that, a 2-week turnaround time, that of course is going to be dependent upon us having access to the information we need to be able to make that, our consultants to be able to give us some advice on this. So far, by all indications, it appears that there's a willingness to do that, and that has already been put into motion. But I agree that it's a holistic look. It is not just a question of looking at the theater economics.
Okay, that's fine. Are there other comments or questions? All right, let's keep going, Mr. Shields. I know some of us here on council have concerns about moving forward with Founders Row conversations when we have so many outstanding issues with Founders Row 1. And I actually thought that was our consensus last week when we met at our agenda meeting. But nonetheless, here we are. Mr. Duncan, Ms. Leon.
Caroline, why don't you go first?
Ms. Leon?
Yep, apologies, having audio issues. I just want to make sure, seeing this slide for the first time, that in this proposal by Mill Creek, are the receipts greater than 360K threshold still retained by the city? Did that change, or is that the same with this?
Yeah, that would remain the same.
Okay. So, and the 3% annual increase to the city share still remains intact?
Yeah, we have not negotiated the request, but in the letter, the 3% construct would remain intact. I think that's one for us to look at carefully. That escalator clause. Okay. I think that's something that will be part of the discussion.
Okay. That's good to open that up, Wyatt. That was my next follow-up question is, where is this in stone versus what's the flexibility for that? Okay, you answered it. I think I have more questions, but I know let me hold it until the end because I know we've got more on Founders Row 2 to present tonight. So, Bill?
Okay, Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say thanks to the manager for putting this on the track, and thanks to the developer for getting the information sharing process started. Look forward to hearing the outcome of this. Question for Mr. Muffler. I mean, where do you think stand realistically on when a movie theater could be up and running in the Founders Building, based on your read of market conditions and your particular situation there?
Yeah, so I think there's a handful of things. So we are prepared, as you may recall, there is an obligation for us to fund $3.6 million into an escrow account for the theater build out. We do have plans to do that within the month, or within the next truly like 30 calendar days. We plan on having that lease. We hope to have the lease completed in the next few months, which requires getting pricing, hiring the GC, finishing the design, etc. All this is to say construction would start late summer, early fall, with full intention of being open before Memorial Day 2023. That's the target, just given kind of the movie release schedule. It could be open before then, but the outside date is Memorial Day 2023. That's the ideal target. So we're on pace and we're working hard for that date.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other comments or questions? All right, Mr. Shields, please proceed.
Okay, so we'll now turn to Founders Row 2, and we'll start tonight's staff presentation with Jeff Holler, and I appreciate his hard work on this project. He will provide an overview of the project and the some of the changes. Really, it will focus on changes since the last time the council discussed this, and then we'll turn it over to to Mr. Muffler for his presentation. Mr. Holler.
Thank you, Wyatt. Thank you, Mayor Tarter and members of the City Council. I'm Jeff Holland with the planning staff. Tonight, Council is requested to review and provide feedback on submission 3.1 of Founders Row 2 mixed-use development application. This submission is largely the same as submission 3, which you saw during the February 7th work session. Updates since then include just updates to the voluntary concessions in response to council direction and related changes in the conceptual development plan. Everything that you see in the staff report that has changed since that work session will be highlighted in gray. So the applicant provided a complete submission, which was 3.0, in response to comments received during the board and commission process. And the changes since then, which we're calling a submission 3.1, were primarily to the voluntary concessions. In summary, those changes would include a commitment to 10,000 square feet of designated restaurant space, a commitment to installation of storefronts prior to the final certificate of occupancy, that the parking garage will have signage to notify visitors of residential versus retail parking. There was an increase of contribution to the city stormwater fund from 20,000 to 45,000. Requested parking, the requested parking reduction has changed from 26% down to 22%. There's been a commitment to install conduit and provide necessary space for a future solar panels. There's been a clarification that a minimum of 50% of spaces will allow for electric vehicle charging stations, and that there's been an adjusted affordable housing contribution so that 12% of total units are at 60% AMI or below, and now includes 2 units at 40% AMI. So like I said, this was discussed during the February 7th work session. Line number 38 has a table of council comments with the applicant response in submission 3.1. I think of most note is council's desire to link commercial openings with residential COs. The applicant has responded by stating that a minimum of 50% of total commercial retail will have improvements underway prior to the issuance of the final 5% of residential COs. And also that Shell Retail will have completed storefront for any space not executed lease at the time of issuance of the final residential CO. I'm going to go down now to line 94, which you'll see, you'll actually see two tables here. But line number 94 has the updated program comparison table from submission 3.0 to 3.1. As you can see, there's not much change, but it does still give a good a view of what has changed. Staff analysis has more or less stayed the same since submission 3. So I'm going to go all the way down to line 521, where we discuss just the voluntary concessions. So we received the updated voluntary concessions at the end of February, and the VCs are subject to continued staff review. But many of the comments staff have made for submission 3 are similar to those made by council. And from what we can tell so far, that many of those comments have either been addressed or are being reviewed and refined as part of submission 3.1. I'm going to skip ahead now to line 611 in the timing section. So as of right now, we received submission 3.1 on February 21st. We're having a work session tonight and another work session scheduled for March 21st to go over staff comments from the latest VCs. And there is a city council public hearing and second reading scheduled as part of the referral for March 28th. So that's the schedule moving forward so far. And then tonight we have, as you know, we have Joe Muffler on the call, who's prepared to give a more detailed presentation on the project itself. So I'll turn it back to Wyatt or to Mayor Tarter. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Holloran. Thank you. It's a very good presentation. Mr. Muffler, do you have a presentation as well you'd like to make?
Would love to. Thank you so much, everyone. And Cindy, I sincerely appreciate you driving the ship here. If you don't mind switching over to this second page, and I will touch a little bit more on the theater in phase 1 as well during this presentation. But again, appreciate you having me tonight. We were here 3 weeks ago, I believe, and there was quite a few offline conversations that happened after that. Questions, clarifications, and asked for additional detail given that we went through an extensive boards and commissions process. And as a result of that process, I believe we came out with a superior project, one that truly benefits the city and provides a lot of substantial upgrades for the city over the current use. So I would like to take the time to go through that, and I will do so as quickly as I can. As Jeff mentioned, the difference between submission 3 and 3.1 was fairly nominal in terms of the major updates of the program itself. The biggest updates occurred between submissions 2 and 3, which occurred back in December. Next slide, Ms. Mester. So I want to really highlight, some of these important updates that may look small in text, but are truly big in terms of the impact that they can have on the city. First and foremost, as we have from the get-go placed a large focus on affordability in this project, committing from the get-go to 12% of the total housing stock being affordable. We have been challenged to find ways of making the mix more affordable, thus opening it up to even a broader spectrum of renters. In the latest round of VCs, we have added 40% AMI units and increased our percentage of 60% AMI units. So now more than half of these units are at 60% AMI or below, which again is a fairly substantial update. I believe they're the first 40% AMI units in the city, or at least in the new project. I apologize. The second bullet point is, it's an emphasis on the environmental aspects of this project, which we have placed a large focus on as well. Long story short, we've heard from neighbors, we've heard from the environmental committee that stormwater runoff in this area is a big issue. What we are proposing to do, replacing an impervious surface lot and an underperforming stormwater pond with on-site detention through a variety of means and methods, we are committing, essentially the runoff you see today will be drastically reduced. And without getting too technical in it, what we are proffering now as compared to before is updating the technical data so that we are using current 2021 data for stormwater reduction, as opposed to code, which code I have learned is about 2 decades old in terms of their calculation of the 10-year storm. So really what this represents is a 20% reduction over current data or 40% reduction over where we were before. We are also increasing our commitment to the Stormwater Fund as indicated. There's commitment to full solar infrastructure installation readiness. The commercial ratio of the project is 8.5%, but as I'll show later, it occupies almost all of the ground floor elements here and really optimizes the commercial layout. Next slide, please. These updates are more from, again, that prior submission, which is increasing that true commercial space by 7,000 square feet. It's a net result of 1,500 square feet. We reduced the residential GFA as well to accommodate a pedestrian pathway that was very heavily discussed and requested during the process that we'll want to talk about. We have the commitment for the co-working space. Our parking reduction has gone from 26 to 22% to allow for the necessary retail parking, but that's still fairly elevated and was requested by a lot of people as well. Jeff has touched on the commitment to install storefront prior to completion. Next slide, please. There's been a heavy focus on pedestrian travel and safety, including a $100,000 commitment to additional improvements beyond what we're doing here that the city will control, traffic calming measures, emphasis on a large amount of open space and tree canopy coverage, additional improvements to environmental architecture, public art, and community benefits that will be discussed as well. Next slide, please. Very briefly, I did want to update on phase 1. I provided this update to the EDC on Thursday. You've already heard about the first 5 tenants, or sorry, I apologize, the first 4 tenants that we had announced, which we're very proud of. The next 3 tenants include a premier operator in the region whose concepts anchor are part of such large lifestyle developments as the Borough, Pike and Rose, Mosaic. It's an authentic Japanese ramen and izakaya restaurant, a bubble tea concept, and a matcha tea and dessert concept. We're very excited about that operator's bona fides and what they'll be bringing to the project. We're also negotiating a lease with a fitness tenant as well, and we've touched on the theater being in discussion as well. Next slide, please. And I apologize, these are actually just some of the accolades that we've seen before. Next slide on the theater update. We've touched on most of this, but what I do want to say, and I made this point at the EDC, the logic behind the theater agreement, the economic development agreement from 6 years ago, is the logic we're trying to apply today. 6 years ago, the city and the developer in partnership decided that this project wanted to have a movie theater. We wanted to bring a movie theater to the city of Falls Church, but the economic realities of such were very difficult. So the tax sharing agreement was put in place to allow for that 6 years ago. Since then, there's been a world change. As we all know, it doesn't need to go into detail, but our revenue has decreased substantially. Costs have increased substantially. The financial analysis will prove that out. And what we've tried to create is a win-win scenario whereby we're not coming in and asking for guaranteed property tax reimbursement. All we want is that if the theater does well, the city does very well, the surrounding retail does well, and the operator, the owner rather, can be made a little bit closer to whole. So that's the thesis and the logic behind this, that we hope is perceived as such as a win-win for all parties involved. And again, we will cooperate fully with that analysis. Next slide, please. This was city staff's report from the end of the boards and commissions process that really guided us. I would say if you were to distill the boards and commissions comments into a few points, these were those points. And this was really our focus as we went through and completed boards and commissions for next submissions. So I've broken them down into buckets that I'll go through fairly quickly. Next slide, please. The first slide is kind of a buffet
Mr.
menu.
Ruffler? Yeah,
Yes,
I don't know about the others on this call, but I'm just still seeing 4th submission, summary of major updates. Are others on this call seeing other slides?
Yes.
Yes,
You're seeing the new slides?
we are.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I don't know. I'm sure that wasn't purposeful, but anyway.
No, I apologize, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I was going to say I'm seeing them.
Oh, it's fine. I have no idea. I'm here at City Hall on a city computer. So anyway, please proceed. I'm sorry for the interruption. Hopefully
No worries at all. So from a transportation and pedestrian perspective, pedestrian safety perspective, this is kind of a buffet menu of all of the things that we are considering, that are not considering, that we are offering and including in our design. Next slide, please. So going through some of these major inputs as you walk around the site, I would say that from the boards and commissions, transportation and pedestrian safety and environmental were really two of the biggest concerns here. So what you can see here is one of our major proposals is how do we alleviate traffic at that Broad and West intersection? How do we focus on that and really optimize that intersection as best as possible? What we've worked with our engineers and the city's engineers to come up with is a means and methods for breaking the median to allow for left turns out of the property here. And what's illustrated here, yeah, again on the left-hand side is if you're a patron for the retail or a resident in the garage and you'd like to go westbound on Broad Street, without a median break, you'd have to go out onto West Street, wait at that light, cause more traffic, and then make the turn. This now alleviates that. And from an engineering perspective, it does provide substantial benefits. We've also included pedestrian safety measures here. And as you can see to the left of this, where there's that little green strip, this is also the pedestrian cut through as well that we'll discuss in more detail here shortly. But this left turn lane, dedicated lane in the garage, left turn onto Broad Street was a big engineering decision that I think will make a drastic impact on that intersection. Next slide. Speaking of that intersection, what you see here is essentially a completion of what happened at phase one, a realignment of the sidewalks, a massive widening of the sidewalks that we will discuss, in addition to revising that signal phasing to allow for concurrent left-hand turns, which will substantially improve the behavior of that intersection. We looked at numerous things here, including adding new lanes to the street, but the reality was at the end of the day, this was the optimal, safest thing that we could do to really improve the quality of life for this intersection and allow for pedestrians and vehicular travel in that neighborhood to get through West and Broad safely and efficiently. Next slide, please. Lastly, at the, sorry, this is about that intersection. I do apologize. And this slide we've shown this slide before, but the net is that intersection today is underperforming and will continue to underperform. What we are posturing here through the concurrent left-hand turns, through the median break, through all these transportation updates, is that traffic signals level of service will be brought back to at least, and again, this is the worst case scenario, so in PM, peak rush hour, the improved future conditions bring it back to at least where it is today, if not better. Next slide, please. And lastly, here is the West and Ellison Street. We looked at the placement of this, the placement of this crosswalk, and I'm happy to discuss those details as well. But the net of this is by creating traffic collars, by providing traffic calming, by shortening that pedestrian crossing, it's not only safer for pedestrians, but it slows traffic, which is frankly the biggest issue on West Street, and will allow for easier turn movements out of Ellison Street as well by reducing the traffic speed. We're also proposing speed signs here, radar speed signs, which will help with the traffic calming as well. Next slide, please. Few other things. Oh, you know what? I apologize. This is a typo. The parking reduction has increased to 22% over our second submission, which was a request. We wanted to get to 26%, but in order to accommodate the proper amount of retail parking, we did reduce that to 22%. We have set aside 3 parking spaces for pickup and delivery, and there's a bike storage facility, as you'll see here on the corner, adjacent the Broad Street sidewalk and the pedestrian cut through. If you go to the next slide, you'll see you'll actually see a visual rendering of the front side of this pedestrian cut through, along with the bike storage to promote multimodal transportation. Next slide, please. Now this may look like a simple diagram, but this was a really big piece of our submission. We were strongly encouraged and requested by neighbors of the project to allow for a north-south continuous passageway so that people could get around the site essentially from all corners. Prior to this, because of the alignment of building infrastructure, the building itself, we could not accommodate this. However, we did remove some residential GFA. We restructured, redesigned a lot of the building, and we now can incorporate a safe, well-lit, covered passageway north and south. If you go to the next slide, you'll see a visual rendering of this as well. And again, we want to praise the neighbors and the boards and commissions for really pushing us on this, because I do think it improves the passageway around the project. Next slide, please. There was a lot of conversation about pedestrian zones. The existing sidewalk is, I will say, 6 feet max, and that usually includes obstructions, traffic poles, etc. What we are proposing is a 6-foot minimum, and when I say minimum, only when there's outdoor seating, tree pits, etc. will you have a 6-foot minimum, but a 20-foot maximum sidewalk width that goes around the site. The next slide will show you kind of locations of where outdoor seating, you'll see it's not all over the place, so that 6 foot is not the standard. And if you go to this, and that's on West Street, if you go to the next slide, you'll see what's on West Street, whereby the existing is 5 feet with impediments and the proposed is 9 feet. So overall, next slide, you're having far improved pedestrian access around the site, far improved vehicular improvements around the site as well. And the next 2 slides, Ms. Mester, really show you those in visual form. The first slide, this rendering is of the 6-foot zone, but you can also see how the sidewalk widens, it's activated. You have the ground floor storefronts that really activate that commercial corridor. And then the next slide shows you where it can expand to 20 feet. And just how wide that is for people trying to get around this site. Next slide, please. We were able to increase our total open space on the project, total open space, to 28%. Which is substantial. Of that 28%, 19% is at the ground floor. So we really think we've maximized open space here. Next slide, please, shows tree canopy coverage, which was a large point of discussion. Our tree canopy coverage is about 14%. It's almost double what we have at phase 1. And that number has gone up because of the north-south passageway on the west side of the building. Next slide, please. This is an overall summary of the environmental conditions that we are offering here. We've already discussed the increased stormwater treatment. We have green roofs along with bioretention planters, open space, solar readiness, and an all-electric building. And we have also committed again to a LEED Gold standard with a 20% savings over the energy baseline, which again is fairly substantial. Next slide discusses retail, which has been increased to 22,000 square feet, and a commitment that 10,000 square feet of this will be set aside for restaurant use. You can see what an ideal merchandising plan can look like and the variety and number of uses that you'll get here. As you'll see on the south side where it says clubhouse, that's where the co-working space will be as well. So next slide, please. This is a new slide from our previous presentation that shows the total ground floor makeup of this building. You'll note that and frankly, that residential level on the bottom side, the residential lobby is misdesigned. That really should be a very small square. It's all about 1,500 square feet of the ground floor area along the commercial corridors of Broad and West Street are maximized with commercial uses. And when I say maximized, we have been challenged to try to grow the spaces and make these spaces bigger. What I would say is that a rule of thumb, if you were to talk to a tenant or a retail broker, is that the depth of the space should be somewhere between 60 and 70 feet. That's for a typical inline tenant. Obviously, if you have a movie theater or a grocery store, it's going to be much bigger. We have pushed this to 70 to 80 feet. And if you think about it, if you have a 1,500 square foot tenant and you've got an 80-foot deep space, you're about at 20-foot width, which feels okay, but you don't want it to feel like a bowling alley. And that's the worry. You start going for quantity. You start sacrificing some of the quality of those spaces as well. And we've already talked about how we had to reduce the parking ratio so that we can get enough parking here to make sure the retail is successful. But I did want to show that we've made a very strong good faith effort to maximize good retail and good commercial use on this site. The next few slides, Ms. Mester, you can click through very quickly. These are just architectural details as you go around the building. There was feedback from the AAB, the boards and commissions, council, et cetera, to try to not mirror phase 1, but to complement phase 1 and activate it in different capacities. So we have updated building colors. We've tried to modernize some of the features with bays and build outs. We've tried to improve upon the building materials. And we fully acknowledge that this will be a continuous design process with the AAB and Planning Commission through the site plan process if we were to get there. But we think that this has improved drastically. It's improved unbelievably since our first submission, and it's gotten better through the boards and commissions process as well. There are also some contextual renderings here that kind of show phase 1 and phase 2. I think the next picture is the next rendering is a solid one coming east on Broad Street that shows phase 1 on the right, or phase 2 on the right, and phase 1 in the distance, how they complement each other. And then the next one is a bird's eye view from Google Map. which again shows it as well. So again, next slide, we will continue to focus on quality materials and advance this discussion through the site plan process. Lastly, and I promise I'm almost wrapped up here, next slide, there's been a firm commitment to public art integration into this during the site plan and post-site plan process. We would like to install an interactive art element in the Founders Plaza, a process that we see running in conjunction with Planning Commission, the Arts and Humanities Council, and even integrating the schools in a more public process. We have also committed to incorporating the history of the neighborhood in this general area into the project, be it in the Founders Plaza or potentially in that north-south passageway as well. Lastly, as I wrap up here, next slide, please. The boards and commissions really ask for us as a guiding text to refer back to the primary and secondary criteria for special exception to see how we responded to that. I don't think we need to go through each of these. I do believe the staff report does a very good job of this, but there are a few that I would like to hit on. The resulting development providing significant net new or renovated commercial space. The existing use of this space is 25,000 square feet, which I think we would all agree is very obsolete. It's not true retail. We're proposing 22,000 square feet of true ground floor retail, along with 5,000 square feet of the co-working, plus 280 residential units. When you translate that to revenue for the city, in 2019, the existing revenue was $30,000. The proposed revenue is $1.8 million, or about $450,000 a year in net fiscal impact. Next slide, please. The secondary criteria with regards to architecture, voluntary concessions in terms of public facilities, affordable housing, which we've touched on before. Next slide, please. This highlights all of those proposed community benefits, which at $41,000 a home, or even if you look at it in terms of a gross square foot percentage, because some of these other projects have been much bigger in terms of per square feet, this would be the highest, I believe, from a per square foot perspective, and compares very favorably on a per home perspective. Next slide, please. A few of these other things touch on environmental commitments, which I've detailed. Transportation, multimodal transportation, emphasizing on neighborhood serving retail. Next slide, please. Actually, in the last slide, again, is more about transportation, which we've placed such a heavy focus on, and our voluntary concessions with the environment. So I went through a lot there. We had a lot to cover. It was a very invigorating boards and commissions process. One of the council members did ask me if there are things that we did not address. I would say holistically, or at least at a, macro, no. Concerns with traffic, concerns with the environment, concerns with retail. We've addressed all of those to the best of our ability. Are there nuances of that? Of course, there were 100 ideas with regards to traffic, and I'm happy to get into details, but I do believe we've made a good faith effort to address people's concerns, get creative about how we can incorporate things like more retail and better pedestrian access. And the result is this project, which I think would go a long way to not only improving that corner, but providing a substantial net positive impact on the city for decades to come. So thank you so much for the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you so much. Let's go ahead and open it up to questions and comments. Let's see who we got first. Is that Mr. Duncan? Phil, would you like to go?
Thank you very much. Sorry, my camera is a little wacky. Let me just ask a couple of quick things and then let others have their turn. I want to talk about parking at the ground level for the 20,000 some square foot retail. So as I look at your documents, it looks like it's about 50 or so parking spaces at grade to serve that 20,000 square foot. Is that right, Joe?
No, I don't believe that's the right number. You're sorry. If you go to that slide, Ms. Mester, and I'll talk through it. I apologize. I'd have to figure out where that ground floor plan was. But that ground floor plan, there's two parking garage entrances, Mr. Duncan, because of the topography, right? You've got the one entrance that is off of West Street, and yeah, maybe there's 50 to 70. There's actually a level above that as well, a small level above that. But then there's another level if you access off of West Street that's below that, that's much bigger. That's essentially the footprint of the building. So we are proposed to park the retail, I want to say at like 4.5 spaces per 1,000, which is less than phase one, but given the lack of a theater and kind of where transportation is, we feel good at 4.5 per 1,000.
Okay, well, let me ask a question that's helpful. I wanted to make sure I understand where the parking is because in previous applications, I haven't, like the Kensington, for instance, I wasn't actually clear on where the parking was going to be. So I guess my question revised then, how much of the parking is at grade or above grade, and how much is below grade in the project as a whole? That includes residential parking.
And I don't mean to make it sound like a trick question, but it's all at grade technically. It just depends on what grade you're using, right? So you've got this level that's I would call the Broad Street grade, and then there's a level below this that's at the West Street grade.
Okay, all right.
So
Okay.
so you could access this from Broad Street, and if you drive down that drive aisle and you make a left, you can see that there's a ramp there that goes down. That ramp would take you down to the level that is not below grade because you're still accessing off of West Street. So you can come in off of West or Broad, go down, go up, and go out either direction either. That's kind of the beauty of how this garage works and allowing for that left turn movement out of Broad Street as well.
Gotcha. As you look at the building, I'm trying to compare it to what we're seeing like at the One City Center application. Is the parking area going to be visible from West Street or Broad Street, except through, obviously, through the entrances, but is the parking itself going to be visible?
Parking itself will not be. It'll be similar to Phase 1. If you've driven by the Phase 1 garage entrance on Broad Street like that, you'll have a big entrance, but the parking is back inside the garage. And again, that's because we're trying to maximize the depth of the retail as well, right? So you push the parking back or in other places to try to maximize your retail.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. Love the median cut. Like to see that tried out. Passageway is great. Affordable housing add-ons are really excellent. So 34 out of the units are going to be affordable housing at a lower level of AMI than I think we've been able to accomplish before in any of the newer projects. So that's good. Traffic and pedestrian improvements, obviously good. The tree canopy, this maybe is a question for Jeff. And reading the documents, the 15% standard for tree canopy, do I read your staff report right in saying that that's 15% for parcels that are 5 acres or more? This one is, I think Joe said 14% on 2 acres. Do I have my math right? Is that correct?
That's correct from my end.
Okay, so it nearly achieves the 5 acre standard on a 2 acre parcel, so that's, I think, good. One other question, the character elevation that shows up on the document A2.0, does that match up on the Broad Street elevation side? Does that match up to the pretty picture that you showed? It looks to me like the entrance to the garage and the character elevation is not as pronounced as the pretty picture that you showed. Yeah, there you go. Are those the same?
Yeah, that's the model. Like this isn't a rendering. This is the actual building model
Okay.
that the architect uses. So that this should be pretty accurate.
Okay, so that's what it will look like. Okay. All right. I think that, I don't think anything else I'll ask to be put back. Oh, I know one other thing. The Planning Commission and Tim Stevens and others were very keen on the business of coordinating the residential and the commercial so that they both try to come online at somewhat more the approximate same time. So your answer to that is this installation of storefronts language. Not quite sure what that means. Does that mean that we will not have plywood and plastic stickers on the plywood, but rather we will have glass frontage? It doesn't actually mean you're going to necessarily, have an operating store that is building out. But am I right about that? What is the storefront mean?
Yeah. So at that time, prior to completion, if any space that isn't leased, we will install the storefront on. If there's a space that's leased and they're working through design like Chase and Tails is right now, we would allow them to install their storefront. But exactly right, to prevent what's happened across the street, which again is largely driven by the fact that got set back a year in the pandemic, but neither here nor there. Lesson learned, right? We want to make sure that there's storefronts here activating the street from the jump.
Great. Okay. Thanks for your time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Yep. Ms. Connolly? Ms. Connolly?
Thanks, Mayor Charter. Thank you. And Thanks, Mr. Muffler, for your presentation. I have a few questions related to some of the documents that were submitted as part of this. And the first one really is for staff. The idea that we would hold back 5% of the occupancy permits until 50% of the commercial shell is begun. That's new language. How does that compare to other occupancy permit restrictions that we've put on other mixed-use buildings?
So I probably could be the best one to speak to this. I think whenever we have the commercial guarantees or the commercial lease up tied to certificates of occupancy, that's a very strong provision in the voluntary concessions, and it's something that's always very difficult to work through. And it, stems from the kind of the core, one of the core primary criteria for a special exception is to have compelling commercial uses that help grow the city's commercial tax base. And so we've had a variety of various different ways of trying to provide those guarantees. The best is to tie it to the residential certificates of occupancy. And
So that-
or at any rate, that's a very strong way
Right.
to do so.
So those percentages are within the bandwidth of what we've done. Are they different? Are we trying something different this time? 5% occupancy permit until 50% of commercial?
So that is a lower number than Founders Row 1, 5%?
It's the same as Founders Row 1.
Okay. And I think I think the language was slightly different with Founders Row 1 just because of the interest in the commercial anchor in Founders Row 1, i.e. the theater. But at any rate, I think they're, I'll take it that largely they're similar then.
Okay, thanks.
And Ms. Connolly, if I may, I guess I'll say it bears repeating, but similarly to across the street, we will own and operate all of the retail here as well. So this is not a situation where we only care about the residential. The retail is a meaningful part of this program,
Okay,
economically speaking.
right. Okay, and that's important. In your voluntary concessions, as you've talked about your wider garage entrance, can you include in the voluntary concessions that the interior of the garage will be finished or painted somehow so that we don't have raw concrete block showing?
That has been included in the latest round of VCs,
Okay,
painting and signage.
okay. And then I have some questions related to the comment matrix from staff. So comment 16 mentions the signal cabinet and the addition of, it's not that document, Cindy. It's the one called Founders Row 2. For submission staff responses.
I will work on opening that one.
Okay. So comment 16 mentions the signal cabinet related to the traffic lights.
Yep.
And I'm wondering if that signal cabinet can be included somehow in the public art initiative for that area, working with Falls Church Arts on the art that they're doing, trying to start on signal cabinets.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. That was our exact idea of that. We've actually had a lot of discussions with DPW, with Public Works, on all the traffic infrastructure that's here. So the goal will be to relocate it, because if you were looking in this rendering right now, it would kind of be in the middle of the frontage of that building. So we're looking on an optimal way of relocating it, and I certainly wouldn't be opposed to some kind of art on it as well.
Okay. Comments 22 and 23 are a comment from one of our transportation engineers, and it says in there that there'll be transportation data provided under another document, and I'm wondering if that's come through there.
It should have. Jeff can confirm if staff received it. It was submitted. It's very, very like technical outputs of their model of their software.
Yes, we did receive that as part of your submission.
Okay. And it trues with whatever it is that we need to know?
Yes, but I can double check with Public Works staff. They should have had a chance to look at it by now.
Okay, that'd be good. Thank you. Comments 26 through 28 are about stormwater pipes. And it says the 60-inch stormwater pipes are consistent with the existing pipes. But Mr. Muffley, you just mentioned that we're doing more for stormwater than we would have otherwise. Does this need to be more? A 60-inch pipe? I don't, and again, I'm not a pipe expert, but.
Yeah, neither am I. I'm not a stormwater expert either. I mean, we have an on-site detention facility. So the on-site detention facility is what really helps with the runoff and the runoff reduction, along with our other, the green roofs and the bioretention planters. But it's really it's a stormwater vault. So again, trust the engineers, right? But the engineers have reviewed this with the DPW, with the civil engineers, and they've concurred that the stormwater pipes are enough as long as the runoff rate, and really that's what's key. It's how much water are you putting into the pipes at any given time. If you have a big vault that can release the certain amount at time, the pipe size should be sufficient.
Okay, so the major improvement there is the vault, not the pipe diameter.
It's the vault along with all the other associated stormwater treatments on the site. Like I said, the green roof and the bioretention planters being the others.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Comment 33. We asked, the comment says that because there are trees, mature trees being removed, there's a request for $45,000 to $60,000 to make up for that. And then your response is that you've added $25,000 there.
No, we increased it by 20. So it was $20,000. Mr. Prince recommended it be $45,000. So we have increased the $45,000. I would like to note that those trees being removed are for the benefit of the traffic in the median, not because we want to remove more trees or anything like that. But we understand the importance of stormwater. So yeah, we've essentially more than doubled the commitment to $45,000.
Okay, so then the official response is that you've increased it to 45.
Yeah, that's right. It's bad writing.
Okay. Comment 34, Kate Walker mentions that she thinks the landscape lawn, that we better not to have landscape lawns, and you say we better to have landscape lawns. I'm just wondering, I'm not the expert on this one either, but how is that decision made from a city side? Was there discussion about it, or did your team, Joe, just say that this is how we're going to do it?
No, there's been discussion throughout. I think a lot of this comes down to a matter of personal preference and kind of where the priorities are. I do see this as being a site plan conversation. Our contention has been that I think there's been a lot of confusion about these lawns. I think Ms. Connolly, you and I have talked about them, that these are really public areas. Like you can walk your dog and the dog can go on those lawns. We're maintaining them, but because we want this to fit into the residential context, we want these to look like townhomes with front lawns so that they complement the residential across the street. If we were to turn those lawns into essentially like shrub areas with all kinds of growth and shrubs, that might look a little weird, just to be very candid. Mm-hmm. So again, I think it comes down to personal preference, and I'm sure we'll continue to discuss it during the site plan.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that thought wasn't lost. And I see where you're coming from if you're trying to match. And I see where she's coming from if she's trying for the environmental impact. All right, question 35. There's a highlighted area about solar panels with no real.
This was all updated in the latest round of VCs. We essentially took this language and put it in there.
Okay. And then on the Wells and Associates report, they recommended a right in, right out on Broad Street. But now you've added a left in, out.
That's a typo then.
Has Wells & Associates had a chance to look at this new plan?
Wells & Associates has been intimately involved throughout this process. So that's either a typo or it's a laggard comment that wasn't updated. So this was right in, right out at one point in time. It is now left in and left out.
Right.
Yeah.
But in the Wells & Associates report, their original report, they say right in, right out is what is the best thing for Broad Street. And then upon, subsequent discussion, it's changed to left in, left out, right in, the whole, fully functional there.
Yeah.
How does that jive with their original report?
Yeah, we didn't know that a left out was possible when we made our original solution. Because again, that median's there. So it was only frankly after we met with the neighbors and had real in-depth conversations with the engineers that we added that. I believe their subsequent report, which should have been in the December submission, would include this left turn analysis in the improvements. It was a lot of discussion with the engineers, so I know the analysis has been conducted.
Okay, all right. And then in the Board and Commission comment matrix, and Cindy, you don't have to go to this one, but the EDA says we're really pleased. There's a strong fiscal impact here. And then the VPIS response says it's not a strong fiscal impact. So I'm just wondering, I mean, clearly, Mr. Muffler says it's a strong fiscal impact. I'm just ask staff, who's right on that one? I mean, if we're taking Board and Comment commissions.
So the way we typically look at that is net fiscal impact per acre and then compare that project to project. Mr. Hollern, are you able to speak to that?
I can jump in there for a moment. Paul Stoddard, Planning Director with the city. It is laid out, I believe, in the staff report, or it was in an early version of the staff report, previous version, that the net fiscal impact per acre, I think, is upward above $200,000, which is consistent with previously approved projects.
Yeah, I believe it's $235,000 an acre.
Okay, so
Yeah, just to motivate it, the reason for doing a per acre basis is to normalize the data so that you're not comparing the fiscal impact on say 4 acres of development to 2 acres of development.
right. So I guess my final comments are just related to information that you have that is kind of correcting incorrect information that is in comments from boards and commissions, and also neighborhood concerns about traffic and about stormwater. You have really good answers to those things. And I just want to make sure that we are responding to all the people that raise the questions to say, yes, you do have that concern that it's not a really impressive fiscal impact, but it actually is, and here's why. Or you're really worried about the traffic, here's what we've done. So I just want to make sure that those responses get back to the community members who have raised concerns so that they're not, so that they're fully in the loop in the process as we go forward.
Thank you.
This party.
Thank you. I'm glad Mary Beth went first because she actually covered lots of mine, but maybe it's just a format thing. So, because I know that we have a matrix for, I read through the staff comments and there's a matrix that shows kind of what the Mill Creek response is. I think it'd be great to kind of adopt a similar format for board and commission comments so that people know that, oh yes, we acknowledge this one, here's what we're doing about it, or no, this we've heard you, but this is our response. Maybe it's just a formatting thing. So thank you for going through this in more detail. I wanted to make sure we did do justice to all the time that the board and commissions went and spent on this project. So overall, I like the improvement, obviously, on affordable housing and the stormwater commitments, the north-south path, which I know several boards talked about. One clarification on the changes to solar. Essentially this, and I think the fully electric building, I think, is also worth mentioning, especially in light of gas appliances and using natural gas. So that is commendable as well. On the solar front, though, are you just getting it PV ready with all the conduit and kind of clustering all of the utilities on the roof, or what exactly are we doing? Or is it actually going to have solar panels?
So yeah, and I think we touched on this on the EDC. To be clear, the commitment itself is for the full infrastructure. It's not for the panels. However, cards on the table, to get to that 20% energy baseline improvement that we've talked about, we are actively looking at solar. I have never done solar in my career before. It's becoming a little bit more popular in this area, but it's still kind of a little bit new. So we're learning about it. I think we will end up doing solar, but we're not committing to. We are committing, though, to full infrastructure, which is above and beyond what we did at phase 1. So this will have the electrical room built out, the conduit, the inverters, the panels, everything else. So all someone would have to do is buy the panels, connect them, and then they'd be set up.
Okay. And then roughly, do you know how much capacity it would generate? Like, would it get your building to be, is it only the 20% energy usage improvement, or could it do more than that?
It would do more than that. I can't tell you what the outage is. I mean, I can tell you this, the way we're looking at it, it would take up almost the entire south portion of the top part of the building. It's a lot of space, a lot of panels, and it'll get us to where we need to be, but it's not like the whole building will be run on solar. That's not the case. Until the technology becomes a little bit more efficient, it's just not possible, I don't think.
Okay. I know as a community, we're really proud that our high school is net zero ready, and hopefully with the prices of PV coming down, we'll be able to do that. So it'd be great for the commercial components in the city to do it as well. So speaking of commercial, I know that we're doing some improvement on getting the 22,000 square foot of ground floor. I think 10,000 of it's going to be committed to restaurant. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and that's in the VCs. And
That's
I've
correct.
always said that I personally think quality is more important to me than quantity of commercial. But what is your other 12,000 square feet? Do we have a sense of what that is going to be, and is there a commitment in the VC for that?
There's no commitment in the VCs because again, you want to run that balance, right, of understanding what you're going to get without being overly prescriptive, because as we've all learned, the retail industry changes by the month, let alone 3 or 4 years from now when you're actually delivering this. So the slide above this actually shows kind of the ideal merchandising plan. We've always said that as a complement to phase one, which is very much lifestyle entertainment focused, that this would be a little bit more neighborhood serving focused. This was not something that I just came up with on a whim. This was not something that I said, hey, how do I optimize my bottom line? Like, what are the highest paying uses? These were conversations with residents, with neighbors of the project. What are you going to use? You know, what is it on a daily basis you could do? What would you do and then come to Founders Plaza and hang out? And these are a lot of the uses that came out of that. Hey, there are things that we could use on a daily basis, not just kind of a date night basis, that would be really helpful here. So that's how we try to balance it, along with restaurants. This may be aggressive in terms of the number of uses, but it's not that aggressive, and it's certainly not aggressive in terms of what it is that we'd be targeting. So hopefully that helps answer that question.
Okay. 2 transportation questions. So the north-south path, so that is great. How wide is it? I know that there's a couple of renderings, but it's hard to get a sense of scale there.
It's a good question, and it varies, right? Because there are a couple of pinch points, and then you've got the building that's adjacent it. I believe I can tell you this, that there's like 15 feet between the face of our building and the adjacent building. So if you're going based on that path plus the green area that's adjacent to the path has got to be at least 10 feet, if not more.
And so because they're pretty tall buildings on us, especially your side and the other side, I think the lighting and the landscaping will be really important. And I don't know whether there's a better rendering than what's already included, but I guess I would ask either for both things. One, better lights, and maybe it's string lights or just not like stark security lights, because that's just not going to feel inviting and be frankly used, right? And then more potentially, trees or green space beyond what you already got there to improve that. But I like the direction of the house.
To balance. Like, you don't want trees in that space because then it's going to start feeling even more. That would make it feel claustrophobic. So it's a lot of ground covering, along with lights in the ground covering, lights on the building as well.
Yeah. So instead of just doing path lights on the ground, make sure, I guess, there's some sort of like overhead light that makes it feel again welcoming for people.
Absolutely. And again, this is a site plan element as well that we'll continue to refine.
Okay. On the crosswalk, so I like that we've narrowed the crosswalk at Southwest and Ellison, because that is kind of a pretty dangerous one, and we did that during the walking tour. If I could make a request, and maybe this is something that the traffic engineers can work with us on, is in light of all the complaints we have about other kind of unprotected crosswalks across the city, I think there's the little flashing beacons, Wyatt, are called RRFBs. So essentially it's PED actuated. So it's not a full hawk signal because it doesn't actually change a traffic signal, but they're flashing beacons to kind of make it more visible. I would hate for people to be rushing up Northwest to try to catch light at Broad. And so if we're going to improve that crosswalk, I would love to see some sort of improvement in terms of flashing beacons or lights of some kind. Is that something that you guys would be open to?
Absolutely. It might even be on that buffet menu of items that we talked about. But no, absolutely. One of the things that we looped in lieu of that was the radar or speed signs, which flash. I guess that's been proven to have a more impactful deterrent on speeding, especially because we're going to be shortening that pedestrian path. But long story short, I mean, I agree. There's a lot of things we could do here, and I'm happy to look into the beacons.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'm not opposed to having both the flashing ones and extra.
It'll be a conversation. We'll talk to the engineers about it.
Great. And then while we're on lights, I read through the VCs. I currently see that we're committing to having, I think, outlets in the tree pits for kind of future streetlights. And I don't forget what we're actually committing to at Founders 1, but would we be willing to actually kind of continue the city's streetlight or tree light program kind of along the streetscape on Broad Street here?
So
is that something that you guys can take care of?
I hate to defer on this one. I actually talked to Paul Stoddard a little bit earlier about this. The city was refining their language about these outlets in the trees. So Paul, I don't know if you want to take this. I think this language I took from the most recent VCs from the Broad and Washington project. That's about all can say on that one specifically.
Yeah, happy to jump in. I think what we were trying to refine was the language around the outlets, and we, as Jeff Hollard mentioned earlier, staff is doing a scrub of those VCs, and I think that the staff request is going to be for outlets and the planters. That seems to be where we need them to support lighting. But if I understand correctly, Councilmember, you're actually asking about the applicant to volunteer to actually run the tree lighting program itself, in addition to providing the outlets.
Well, I think, for example, in front of 301 West Broad, they actually light those trees because it's part of their streetscape. I don't know whether it'll be consistent with what we eventually end up with, but I was just hoping that it would just get taken care of as part of the development. It's up to you all. It's something that,
Yeah,
you know,
I'll be honest,
I'm
not familiar with that.
Yeah, I think the intent is that we want the tree light program to run the length of Broad. I will leave it up to staff and the developers to figure out whether we just want outlets or we want the program to be run by the developer as well. I really love Mary Beth's comment about using the signal cabinet. I guess my preference would be, let's get the signal cabinet out of the streetscape because they're pretty ugly and big, but if they do have to be visible somewhere, then it'd be nice to dress them up with art. And there's a great sample one that the Arts Humanities Council kind of piloted at the corner of Little Falls and Park in front of City Hall. My last two are for staff. I'd like to see the benefits per unit number updated. I think it's still at 41,000 in that matrix, and that's probably before some of the VCs were updated by Joe. So before we talk about it again, I don't know how hard it is to update that run. And then second, along the lines of what Mary Beth asked is, what are the big comments, I guess, from staff's perspective that are not resolved with this latest submission? So as we get hopefully towards the finish line, are there big items that we feel are not responsive that still need more discussion? And again, we don't need to answer that tonight, but more kind of two takeaways before we revisit the topic.
Okay, Ms. Leon.
Yes, thank you so much for this information. I think I echo Ms. Hardy's comments on just updating the community benefits summary. I'm looking at this and, you know, I'm seeing that the public art is missing from the schools, parks, and civics, but I heard it was mentioned. I love the fact that when I sit here and look at this matrix, when I look at innovation and what we're building, particularly in environmental sustainability, I mean, this is by far, you know, an example of a build that's pushing what we would call innovative. You know, in the city, I'm just looking at just the number of words and bullets over on that side compared to everything else so far. Just some small details as I look at the transportation streetscape column of this. We have a bus shelter at 40K. Just curious why that amount is higher for Founders Road 2, that allocation than prior developments. Is that just inflation or you know, I mean, prior developments, bus shelters were like 15,000. Broad and Washington, two of them ran for 40. So I'm just curious, why is that a larger allocation for this one?
I can speak to that one. So that is exactly as you said. It's just the rising cost of construction. So the first time the city requested a cash in lieu, we were estimating it based off the cost of the shelter. Then we actually went out and built some ourselves and found out you have to pay for engineering and the pad. So we added those costs in. And then we found when we installed the shelter a few years later that costs had risen both for the labor as well as the parts. And so we're just trying to keep that number tracking with the actual cost to the city if it chooses to do the install.
Yeah. Thank you. Another question on transportation is I've been in a couple community meetings where residents were concerned about street parking on Ellison. When we refer to under this community benefits matrix, residential parking zoning on Ellison allocated at 10K, what exactly is that 10K covering?
So that 10K is to work with city staff and public works on signage, permits, striping, whatever it takes to make sure that section of the street is designated for Ellison Street or for whatever that zone permit parking is, said otherwise, so that residents and retail patrons of this building are not parking along Ellison Street, that's reserved for the for those neighbors. So it's a $10,000 commitment to work with the city to get it right, rather than make the city pay for whatever signage and anything else that might come from it.
Got it. So I think for the city staff, we just have to be careful and provide the citizen input on what exactly we're doing to, in terms of how we're zoning for parking in that space. So I think that seems to be outside of you, Mr. Muffler, and I think it's with the city to clarify. Is that correct?
Yeah, I have to do that. It's a funny thing that every time we get into these conversations about residential permit parking, it's now something that city staff has worked on 3 or 4 times with these major projects, but it's new for the neighborhood. So you got to start the conversation from the beginning about what do they need, what are their concerns, and how can we write a program that works for them. So that $10,000 cost is there to cover the cost of the signs, the cost of the stickers, regardless of the hours, whether it's during the day, overnight. The signs cost the same no matter what words you put on them. So staff is comfortable that $10,000 cost covers the cost of the signs and the stickers.
And I think I just want to make sure there's community involvement and making sure folks are aware of as to what that is, right? What is the zoning for parking in that space? So going past the cost and just making sure there's community engagement in response to their concerns around what we're doing around street parking. Right.
Agreed.
Your request. My last comment on this overall is that, I did not vote on, I wasn't on council when Founders Row 1 went to vote. I'm sitting here looking at Founders Row 2 and am really appreciative of what I'm seeing, just staring at this community benefits matrix. The fact that, if you went through and looked at the comments and the work that not only Mr. Muffler have done, but the staff in terms of effort that's going into this 2.1 acres, of land. I have concerns when we tie one project, particularly, due to market downturns and just as a result of market downturns, just, having a longer lead time to meet lease and sales pre-commitments. I'm concerned about, transferring the risk of that to a different project across the street when you look at parameters and the features that make this distinct and tying it right to Founders Row 1. I think we need to take a look at what this project offers uniquely and benefits in innovation in terms of how it pushes the envelope for what we envision as a city and what spaces like this can contribute to the city, the future 5 to 10 years from now, and not transfer the risk of a prior development into this. And I see that if we tie one development to another, what we're doing from a risk management perspective, and I manage risk, in my job is you're transferring that risk. I would prefer that we keep them separate and that we contain the risk from one development project unique to that development project, and not prolong the life cycle, and increase the time and effort, right, and work that's gone on this, and put up additional lead times into something that I believe staff has really put a lot of work on, and it shows. So, and with that, Mr. Mayor, I think those are my last comments.
Sure, thank you. Other comments from other people? Does anyone else have any comments? Mr. Snyder?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So there was a particular comment made by CACT, so I'll start with that one. Very critical of the left turn proposal, so I think that needs a lot more work. CACT has really expressed serious concerns about the safety of that element of the project, so I think that needs to be addressed. Secondly, the proposed certificate of occupancy provision is almost laughable. The developer would only have to comply with 50% of their commitment. And if they did, there'd be no tie to the certificate of occupancy. And if they didn't, there'd only be a 5% tie. That's like giving the sleeves off your vest. So if we're going to hold this developer to actually doing what they've committed to do and they've promised to do, then I think the penalty for not doing so should be much more severe than what we've seen. I do believe fundamentally that with the history of this developer with Founders Row 1, where there is still not anywhere near full compliance with the original promises made, that to allow that developer to make millions of dollars more on another project after having failed to comply with its promises on the first project is the height of poor negotiating, if not irresponsibility. So regardless of the merits of Founders Row 2, I'm not in any place to vote for it until we get total and complete fulfillment of the promises made in return for the millions of dollars of profit that the developer is making off of Founders Row 1, until those commitments to the city are fully complied with. And if we've seen, as we've seen, those commitments at the best are only 75%. And frankly, that's a number that has almost no meaning considering the tentative nature of large percentages in that alleged 75%. So for all of these reasons, this project, Founders Row 2, is not ready. I think we're asking to be taken advantage of by a developer who has shown its inability or unwillingness to comply with promises made in Founders Row 1. With regard to Founders Row 2, I've mentioned the CACT in specific. Of course, the commercial percentage, again, is almost laughable at the amount that they're talking about. The net return to the city is again, very much open to question as to whether we're actually going to see it. So for all of those reasons, I don't think we're in any, can responsibly move forward on Founders Row 2 at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. And let's wrap up this conversation. It's 9 o'clock. We do have other matters to get to as well.
Thank you. I'll be quick. I appreciate you recognizing me. Question for Jeff. On line 316, the information about the fiscal impact. Just want to make sure that the number that's on line 318 is actually correct, which says that the properties as they currently perform, the Dead Rite Aid and the chronically going out of business carpet store, provide a total of $1,323 in total revenue. Could that possibly be right?
We received that number a long time ago. I think that's been in the staff report here for quite a few times. But I can double check with you on that and make sure. But I think it's pretty accurate.
Okay. Well, just to go to the question that Ms. Connolly raised about views of what is an appropriate level of fiscal impact, if the numbers are even close to right in the $453,000 annual projection revenue, that equals about a penny on the tax rate. And I know that may not seem like a lot to some folks, but for those of us who are going to be working on the budget here very soon, we're going to cut each other to pieces over a penny or two or three on the tax rate. So it's just, I think, helpful for the community to have a perspective on how, if 2 acres of land can throw off, a penny on the tax rate, that is a significant fiscal impact. Just want to make sure that number is correct. Okay, thank you.
All right, Ms. Hardy, brief comments?
Yeah, just a final request. So in light of kind of Caroline's comments for us to consider the two projects separately, and I hear also Dave Snyder's concerns, I wanted to at least make a formal request to Joe and perhaps staff to work together on, what are ways, if we're not going to get the theater lease, knowing that we have to have the several steps of analysis and weeks that staff is going to take on this, and obviously the work that you're doing with the theater operator. What are other milestones that you're willing to commit on paper that we will track to that shows forward progress, right? Like, I get that there's externalities that you may not be able to control, and COVID obviously happened. But I think what the intent of this is to show that we are making good on Founders One, and what are the other ways that we can demonstrate that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. What I'd like to say is I'm hopeful that we've been demonstrating it, right? Like, since you referred us to boards and commissions, we've announced 7 restaurants, or 7 tenants rather. We've announced that we have a letter of intent with the movie theater, which is, again, no, it's not binding, far easier said than done, right? So there has been a tremendous amount of progress made, Founders 2 irregardless, since you referred us to boards and commissions essentially in October. We are, in the next 30 days, prepared to fund the $3.6 million. Again, I'll reiterate, $3.6 million we're going to put into an account, into an escrow account that's solely for the use of the theater and their build out. So that is something that will happen fairly immediately as well. I think that's kind of where I am with this, right? We have made our request to the city. I know the city's going to do their analysis as quickly as possible. I don't think anyone here wants to rush the process. So very high level, things are moving in the right direction. A great project at phase 2 and a movie theater getting ready to open by Memorial Day next year, and trying to structure something in a win-win capacity. So I don't mean to dodge the question, Ms. Hardy, but that's kind of where my head's at. There's been a tremendous amount of work done thus far, and we'll be putting in a ton of money here very shortly to keep this advancing.
Yeah, I hear all that. So you don't need to give me those milestones now, but I think what I'd like is kind of more concrete steps between now and lease signing, and say, here's what will happen between now and when that lease shows up, and here's how we're going to track to it. And if we can hit those, that means that we're moving positively, right? And again, I don't need you all to come up with those now. I think everything that's happened to date is positive, but it is not a lease. And so I'm trying to kind of bridge the concerns I'm hearing on council, and that feels like a reasonable way forward.
All right.
Thank
so
you.
let's keep going here. I've got a few.
Mayor, we just lost your audio again. You're showing mute.
Okay. Debbie just looks like she's turned up. Do you want to, Debbie, I don't know how much of the conversation you've been able to absorb, but if you have some comments, then that would be a good time.
I've been here since Mary Beth's comments. I just wanted to emphasize her comments on solar, and then I also wanted to reiterate Letty's position as well with regard to what signs that we can see, because I, want to be making the best decision for the city, and also feel the need to bridge, two ends of the spectrum here. So that's really all I wanted to add, and I'll let you get back to your points, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you. So I've got a few questions. I see that in the VCs, it talks about a 6-foot pedestrian zone. To my recollection, we have a 10-foot clear zone on the major roads. I didn't see that in the VCs. Is that there, Mr. Shields?
I'll have to follow up with you. I don't think that is in the VCs right now, and I think you're referring to Streetscape Standards.
Yeah.
And so we'll circle back on that.
Yeah, so that was 10-foot clear. That means no obstructions, not chairs, not poles, not other things on the major roads. And then I believe it was 6 on the side streets. But if you can, it'd be great to see some of that in here. So a few more questions. In terms of materials, is there any cementitious board here?
I don't believe so. I know that the city is not big fans of that. I'd have to go back and confirm as to how much, if any.
Okay, I would just certainly say I'm not a big fan of it. I think it's a cheap material, and I don't like it on the buildings, and I don't think it ages well. So I would just say we didn't go through the entirety of the building. I presume it's mostly masonry. But if there is cementitious board, I will probably have comment at some point on that. In terms of Founders Row 1, I've gone past that. I've gone in the garage. Is the garage finished on the inside? Like, as soon as you take 1 foot inside the garage, is it painted wall or is it cinder block, unfinished?
It is not painted wall.
Can you paint that wall?
We could go back and look into that. Yes.
Okay, because I don't think it looks good. I was going to make the comment that I think Mary Beth made about finishing the interior. I don't really care what your people see when they get deep in it, but when I'm walking on a public street, I don't want to see unpainted cinder block wall. So let's see what else we've got. So it talks about in the VC's 10,000 square foot designated for restaurant. Is that also meaning required? Because I think that would be a better word if it's clear that it is actually required. It sounds like you wouldn't have objection to changing the word designated to required or something along those lines. Okay. Also, I may have missed it. Is there any reference to dark sky lighting in the VCs? You've got neighbors that are pretty close by. Dark sky lighting.
I'd have to look into that. I don't
Okay.
remember if that's in there or not.
Okay, so I mean, basically the concept, which you're probably familiar with, is that the lighting is essentially shielded so it doesn't spill over into the neighbors who are close by. I would suggest or ask if you could consider that as well. I'll go back to some comments I've made previously. The ground floor is probably more than half ground floor surface parking, and I would encourage you once again to increase the amount of retail on that ground floor or commercial uses, whether it's pure retail or not. I know the VCs allow you service, retail, and all sorts of things on that ground floor, whether you're planning for them or not, they are allowed. I would encourage you strongly to increase the amount of commercial in your building at 8.5%. To me, that's inadequate and needs to be raised. Our other projects, to my recollection, at least during my term in office, I don't think have any been even twice as much as that as the bottom number. And so I would strongly encourage you to continue to work to make your commercial level higher. The city needs to have a balanced tax base, and pure residential or nearly pure residential is not going to balance the tax base. The vents, there was mention about the vents being flush with the building. If you could also paint them to match the wall. I think the vents at Founders Row 1 are not. They're different color, if recollection serves. But it's a fairly minor request, but maybe you could see if you could paint them to match the wall that's nearby. I also have concern about this notion of tying your last 5% of COs to 50% commercial. It's not even 50% open. It's just starting, I think, tenant improvements, which is a pretty big ways from actually being open. And I would note that, to my recollection, your building has been open for maybe 6 months, and there's not a single tenant in there. As best I can see, there's not really much, if any, TI going on right now either. And so I would caution everyone on council, the best way to tell what you're going to get is to see what you gotten in the past. And so no matter what's said, I would just say, look to the past to predict the future. And the reality is right now, we don't have any commercial spaces open on a building that's fully open for residential uses. And if we want to change that, to my mind, the way to do that is to have concessions, VCs that specifically require certain actions. With respect to the theater, I would say that was a big part of getting Founders Row 1 approved. If there was no theater, my guess is that would not have been approved. There was also a hotel, you may recall initially, which also went away. And so I think the city's been very accommodating of the developer's request, first to turn a hotel into a residential building, and secondly, to not hold COs up for half the building or whatever it was because of the theater. So I think further decoupling or further, less focus on the theater is going to mean we don't get a theater, or if we do get a theater, the conditions will not be favorable to the city because we'll have no leverage whatsoever, and this can just kind of puddle along forever. So I would not recommending proceeding further on this project until we have greater clarity on what happens on Founders Row. If it turns out this is a quick analysis, which everybody seems to think it will be, in 2 weeks we'll know whether this is in fact a request that we want to grant. And if so, we can move forward with it. If not, then that may influence people's decision to move forward on a second round of this. So anyway, those are my general thoughts, my general comments. Ms. Hiska, looks like you have some comments as well.
No, sorry, I didn't put my hand down.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, with that, I think that's the last of the comments. I'd thank you, Mr. Muffler. I know a lot of time has been put into this by not just yourself, but staff, boards, and commissions, and certainly a great deal of progress has been made. I think you're probably of different opinions here before you on how much is left to be needed, but we do thank you for coming tonight, and we look forward to further conversations and hope to move forward, coming up here as expeditiously as possible. But thank you again for your time.
Thank you all. Have a great evening. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye. All right, so it's 9:12. I would just suggest we go ahead and take our break now before we get into smart streets. How about we take a 5-minute recess and then move into our next item, which is the Virginia Tech Smart Cities presentation, and then finally library hours. So let's reconvene unless there's objection at 9:20. If we can. Thank you. All right, it's 9:20. I hope everyone's back and ready to reconvene. Why don't we get the remainder of this meeting back in session and get going on our next item, which is the Virginia Tech Smart Cities presentation. So we'd like to welcome our guests and thank you for coming this evening to speak with us. It's a very interesting and exciting project for the city and I think for the region as well. So welcome to you. I don't know if Mr. Shields, you have any introductory remarks you'd like to make, but I'm delighted to have this on the agenda tonight.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and members of council. And I'll turn it over to Cindy to introduce this item and to introduce our guest from Virginia Tech. But I did want to just note for the community and for council, as the city's been planning the West Falls project over the past decade, but really most intently in the last 5 years, we've repeatedly reached out to our counterparts with the state government, with the governor himself, state agencies, with our federal delegation, and also with Virginia Tech, just to discuss what our plans were for the 10 acres of commercial development, and look for ways that the state might be able to participate in a productive way. Councilmember Snyder was doing work in the area of smart cities and technologies to help with transportation through the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, and in some respects queuing off of that work and also expertise that Virginia Tech has. We ultimately arrived at some ideas with our state partners about using the larger 44 acres of WMATA property, Virginia Tech property, and the city's 10 acres as a zone where some of these technologies can be brought out of academia and put into real world application. And so tonight we'll talk about what that might look like in practical terms, some of the things that people might be able to see that we'd be able to bring to this area, and also just talk about kind of the schedule and the process by which we'll engage in this work. So Cindy, and I should note that the big expression of state support for this idea was in the form of the General Assembly approving a $10 million grant for this purpose, allocated jointly to Virginia Tech and to the City of Falls Church to carry this work forward. So it's a very exciting opportunity, one that we did put a lot of work and thought into, and we're now in the planning phases to how we can make this have real benefits for our community. Cindy, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Shields, Mayor and Council. We're excited to have this opportunity to provide this update tonight. That $10 million grant was awarded in the 2021 General Assembly. It took some processing time to get it through the VDOT process, because VDOT will be administering this grant for us through their innovation function and then into construction and delivery. So we're now at a point where we've done some good planning work. We've got a governance structure kind of established, some good work starting on what is the actual technology and the needs of the city, this whole redevelopment area and so forth. And so we're excited that we have the opportunity tonight to have VTTI, Virginia Tech Transportation Institute, present sort of where we are, their background, and where we're working at as a group. And they will be our lead on the research to make this a living lab, but also they're going to serve as the fiscal agents for this grant dollars and reporting back to VDOT and the General Assembly. And currently this has federal funding in it, so there'll be the reporting required to that. I do want to note we've had some great staff participation in this partnership with VTTI. Zach Bradley and Tara Hoff from DPW, for example, and Zach's on the meeting this evening. We've had Susan Finarelli from the communications side, Jamal Matthews for IT, Kate Walker from the environment, Kristen Michael from school. So it's really a collaborative effort. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our VTTI partners that are with us this evening. And Mike, I'm going to let you kick it off. Let me bring up your slides and allow you to introduce yourself and Reg and Raj that are with us this evening.
Great. Thank you very much, Cindy. Appreciate that. Mr. Mayor, council members, other participants, thank you very, very much for the opportunity to come and speak with you tonight. As Cindy mentioned, we're very excited to be a part of this program. My name is Mike Mollenhauer. I direct the Division of Technology Implementation at the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute. And I have two colleagues on the line as well. I'll just take the opportunity to introduce them rather than taking the time with it. Mr. Reg Vray works for Vtti. He's up in the Northern Virginia area, and he's going to serve as our effectively boots on the ground and direct interface to the folks at Falls Church and all the other stakeholders in the area. And then Raj Bhagavathula is a member of our team at VTTI. He will have oversight into a lot of the community outreach and some of the lighting capacity and other technologies that will be implemented within the area as well. Next slide, please. So what I intend to talk about today, I know we provided a fair amount of material with the handouts before the meeting about the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute, but I just wanted to cover a few highlights that kind of help underscore the reason why we're involved in this program, and we feel that we are, I think, an effective organization to try to help lead it. We'll talk about the grant itself and then some of the proposed smart cities applications that were discussed and addressed within the grant. And then we'll talk about the project and do a review of how we're intending to run it, including the governance structure and sort of where we're at in the process of getting some of the initial needs and initial ideas formed up. And then we'll dive a little deeper potentially into a couple of the initial priority projects and give you some feel for why we are addressing them the way that we are. Next slide, please. All right, the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute, our mission is to conduct research and save lives, time, and money while protecting the environment. Increasingly, that has moved beyond foundational research and more into the outreach work that we do. We oftentimes now get involved in coalition type activities to take technologies from the lab or from a test track environment where they have been proven and tested under controlled conditions, and then take them out into the world and see how they perform in limited pilot deployments, and then measure and assess how they work, and then make prescriptions about how they can be deployed on a broader basis to help support the goals and needs of the communities that can use them. Next slide, please. All right, some facts about VTTI real quick. Again, we're one of the top 3 transportation institutes globally. We believe we comprise the largest group of safety researchers in the world. We have typically around 300 to 500 employees, depending upon whether we're counting students in that and whether or not we're going through COVID times where we ramped down a little bit like many people, but we're very vigorously growing again here in the recent year, including over $60 million in externally sponsored research awards in between the fiscal year 2020 as well as Q1 of 2021. So it's been a very successful organization. We've been around for 26 years. My tenure there has been about 16 years. We've conducted a fair amount of work and research that has positively influenced public policies, including things like how cell phone use while driving. We did a lot of the foundational research and made a fair number of recommendations for how policies and state laws could be devised to help save lives and improve both driver, passenger, and pedestrian safety as well. We've also done a fair amount of work on advancing the safety of infrastructure, both the design and the implementation of that infrastructure, but also the design of vehicles as well. So almost every vehicle that you see coming off the showroom floor these days that has an advanced safety feature, those safety features have most likely been tested on our smart road with our staff. So we get involved in a lot of really exciting new technologies that have the opportunity to really reduce the number of fatalities that we see on the road and improve mobility, but also improve some of the environmental impacts as well. Next slide, please. All right, so what we're here to talk about is the Smart Cities Grant. As Cindy mentioned, it was awarded to the City of Falls Church and Virginia Tech. It's $10 million total, and it was in 2021. We have been spending some time getting, I guess, that money put in a position to where VDOT will administer it. And so it will be actually the Virginia Transportation Research Council, which is the research arm of VDOT, will be administering it. And that's a familiar sponsor to us. We do a fair amount of work with VTRC in developing all kinds of test beds and supporting technology deployments, including the Virginia Connected Corridor, which sits up there in Northern Virginia along US 50, US 29, and Interstates 495 and I-66 as well. And so we're used to working in that area. We've also supported the Fairfax County and Dominion Energy with their deployment of the relay automated shuttle that they have in the area. We do a lot of the safety monitoring and helping to propose solutions when issues come up on the implementation. And so this grant funding was really going to be used to analyze, number one, the needs of the community. I know there were some initial applications that were defined, and I believe that they're largely on target. We also want to look at their other opportunities for us to deploy other technologies. This is a fast-paced world that we're living in when it comes to smart communities, smart mobility types of technologies. So we want to keep our eye on what is proven to be effective and really proven to bring the benefits back to the community. We also want to implement these technologies in the real world, and that'll be working very directly hand in hand with the staff there, both the county and Vtti, with the city folk, the city employees as well. They've been very helpful, and it's been exciting to work hand in hand with them. We'll also be, once we get done with an initial deployment or a pilot deployment, we'll be evaluating the results from both the city's perspective and the citizens' perspectives as well. And so the ultimate goal here is to improve quality of life, and we want to make sure that when we make changes to an environment that we're doing things in a positive way and that the community reaps those benefits. Ultimately, our goal is to make a prescription for these technologies and how and where they might be deployed in other areas, either in the city or throughout the state, other communities, so that people can learn from what we have learned through these implementations. Next slide. All right, so some of the proposed smart cities applications that have been mentioned here. One is smart intersections, and smart intersections really is comprised of a couple of different technologies. Number one, you need, I think, a solid and modern signal controller and centralized system that will help you be able to get data from those intersections into a solution where we can build upon the capabilities. So not only do we understand the state of the intersections themselves, but be able to understand how to modify the timing plans to make them more effective, to be able to move traffic more smoothly through, I guess, the environment. And that includes potentially being able to interface with neighbors. There are several jurisdictions that come together very close to this deployment point, and it would be very nice to have them coordinate between their own operations so that the signals are operating as effectively as they can. In addition, there's other technologies. There are sensors, things like radar, LiDAR, and cameras that can be mounted on intersections that can process their, I guess, raw sensor inputs and help us understand how pedestrians and vehicles are moving through that intersection. And that's really to help us understand where there are conflicts that can sometimes suggest countermeasures, how either the intersection could be designed slightly differently or that we can affect the timing plans to make sure that we minimize the conflicts both between vehicle to vehicle, but also vehicle to pedestrian as well, and make sure that there are smooth traffic operations in general. In addition, there'll be roadway and infrastructure development. So there will be some roadway built as part of this program, but also adding the, I guess, proper conduit, proper power sourcing, and other types of supporting technologies that will make it possible to deploy smart cities and smart mobility technologies that we want to try out so that we're not backtracking and having to tear up roadway to put in things after the roads have been built. We're very interested in smart parking and payment for this environment, knowing that the metro rail station is very close by. And we want to make sure that people are not seeking or searching for parking spaces, just driving around looking for an open spot. We'd like to be able to direct them to open spaces. So that suggests understanding where those open spaces are and being able to provide that information in a very timely and easy to understand and easy to navigate to way. We also want to provide maybe a convenient payment system that would also ensure compliance, but make it very easy for folks to make use of those spaces. Next slide, please. All right, another application is adaptive lighting. Adaptive lighting is a concept where you use sensors to assess the amount of activity that is in a particular area. And then from that information, you can either raise or lower the intensity of the lights and providing more light when it's needed and less light when it's not. And this helps save, energy, as well as make it easier to sleep. It can make areas safer because you can bring the lights up when there is activity and when it's needed. Helps to reduce crime as well. And so we've got a number of active demonstration projects as VTTI that we can share with you that are showing some real benefits. There's also a smart cities data exchange and management system. Again, I believe this is part of what makes a smart city smart, is the idea that you can tie data that are necessary to support multiple applications together into a common repository and be able to operate on that data in real time to develop solutions that can make the whole system more effective rather than just each, I guess, technology that's being deployed operating in its own silo. And then there'll be a potential for data access and evaluation tools is to share data to developers who may want to improve the system. It'll be to help run what-if types of analysis for the city to understand if they were to deploy a new solution, how would it impact operations in the area. And so this is really the ability to capitalize on that data and tying it all together, again, to make the city more smart. Next slide, please. All right, if we put all that together, this is kind of a higher level statement about how we envision ourselves operating. We see that there have been smart cities activities out there, and some have been more successful and some have been a little bit less successful. But I think what we're seeing is the successful ones are the ones that are really starting with people and real problems and not just looking to deploy technology. And I know we've listed a few technologies that we're very interested here at the beginning, but our role right now is to go out and uncover, where there are needs, where the concerns are in the community, where we really need to focus our energy to really make that technology work for us to streamline operations and to make sure that everybody is moving about the environment as safely and efficiently as possible. So that will be our mantra moving forward. And we'll look to reach out to the community as that, that process moves forward. So next slide, please. So this is a kind of a location overview of where the activity area will be focused. Again, we're not fully constrained to these areas, but we do want this to be the focal point. Some of our implementations will likely be out, stretch outside of this area, but this is the area of focus for the intention of the funding. And so it includes the City of Falls Church. That's the area outlined in yellow. There's the Virginia Tech property that's somewhat outlined, I guess, in green there, and then the WMATA facility as well around the Metro Rail Station. And that's I-66, I guess, kind of arching over the top, and then Broad Street down the lower left, and then Haycock to the lower right sort of defines the major area. And so there's a fair amount of activity, of course, in redevelopment there, but there's the high school there, and the public transportation facility, which brings together a lot of different potential users and a lot of desire, I guess, to keep everyone safe with the types of users that will be moving through the area. So next slide, please. Okay, if we look at our approach to how to work through this grant program, I'm going to talk through a couple of steps here. So number one was to establish the operating structure, and we did establish some working groups, and I'll touch on that just a little bit more than in one of the next slide. And each of the working groups has members from our stakeholders group, and effectively our stakeholders for this program include members from the City of Falls Church, Fairfax County, WMATA, Virginia Tech, VDOT and VTRC, high school that's there, as well as developers that are working with to support each of the jurisdictions with their development processes. And so we've invited members to come in, and those that want to participate can from those stakeholders groups. We set a meeting cadence, and then each group has developed its own charter. So we don't want to develop committees and meetings for just to have them. We want to make sure that they have a very focused purpose. And so some of these committees may come and go over time as they are needed, but there will always be a main working group, and that's effectively many of us, or at least one stakeholder representative from each of the groups. And so from the working group, then we have developed, we had some activities that we conducted in person, and had some online participation as well to do some visioning. What do we really want to be the outcome of this activity? Where we talked through in a little bit more detail the applications, where some of the initial needs were, and did some rough budgeting. And then we effectively understand that our job right now is to develop a statement of work that can be approved by an executive steering committee that will ultimately make the decisions about whether to move forward with what we have come up with in the plan. And so we're right in the middle of this process right now in developing that statement of work, which means that we're digging in very deep with the City of Falls Church, with VDOT, with folks from WMATA, all the developers, and other community resources, including work that has been done in the past to understand the flow of traffic in the area, what some of the needs are, so that we can address those in this initial implementation plan. All of that will come together, and we'll create effectively what we're calling our our phase one statement of work. The phase one statement of work will go through the approval process, looking at the working group members first to make sure that everybody's in agreement, and then we'll move it forward to the executive steering committee. And then that will effectively move forward for approval, and we'll implement that set of technology or that set of projects that we intend to focus on first. and then we'll see how those perform, and then through evaluation once they're deployed, and then run through the process again for an effective phase 2, potentially a phase 3. So the idea is to bite off the chunks of work and the deployments that we want to do that make sense based on where the development is in the area and where the needs are that we're seeing. And as we make improvements, then we'll make another, pass at it effectively and iterate as we get feedback from the community. So next slide, please. Okay, I mentioned we had an operating structure. This is largely how it sits. So we'll have the executive steering committee at that top level. We've got a contracts committee. There are, as you can imagine, many types of agreements that need to be made between the jurisdictions, between the different property owners, maintainers. And so that group is focusing in on that to make sure that there are equitable agreements put in place for all the members and stakeholders, and that the most value and I guess the easiest implementations can be delivered for the community members. We have established, I guess, in this first round, as we look at the development activity that's going on and what we're able to address with respect to where construction is and site approvals and things like that, we feel that there are 3 main areas of focus that we can look at. One is community engagement. We want to inform the community about what we're doing with this program and when it will be done. And then there'll be the traffic signals and networking and data group. I already identified that there are some very specific needs in the traffic signals area that we will be addressing. And we're also looking at the management of the data behind the scenes and how you connect those traffic signals up to a centralized system so that they can be easily monitored and maintained as changes are necessary. And then we also have a lighting group. As I mentioned before, adaptive lighting is something we want to look at. And since that is part of the early stage of construction and implementation in the area, that's something we will want to focus on first to make sure that anything that we come up with is in the plan at the right time as to when it's being installed in the area. The whole group, I guess the whole group together, the members serve as the working group, which we meet regularly to share progress on each of our subcommittee tasks and make sure that everybody's staying on track. Next slide, please. Okay, so now a little bit more detail about a few of the initial technologies that we're looking at implementing. So smart intersections. When we say problem here, this is kind of outlining that I think, we have noted community concerns surrounding some vulnerable road users and vehicle conflicts that have occurred recently. And those are, of course, are tragic, and we want to minimize the impact of that on the community. And so we know that there are quite a few opportunities for individuals to move about, the area between both the high school and the nearby retail, as well as the residential areas and the metro station itself. And so I think with Broad Street being as busy as it is, and Haycock as well, in particular times of the day, there's plenty of opportunity here to really focus in on the vulnerable road user safety element of the traffic or smart intersection systems. As you can see, VDOT has identified Broad Street as being a top pedestrian safety action plan corridor. And what does that mean? That means that they've looked at factors that are typically involved in pedestrian and vehicle conflicts. And they have said, okay, here in this particular geographic region, many of those factors are here and present. And therefore, it's like one of the top 1% corridors that needs attention throughout the state. And so I think we would like to focus in on helping to solve that problem with some of the technologies that we have available. As well, Haycock Road is one of the top 5% corridors as well. It's got its own, issues and the presence of factors that could potentially raise the potential for pedestrian collisions. It doesn't mean that this area has more collisions than anywhere else. It just means that all of the potential factors are there that could result in these types of interactions. And so we're trying to take the technology to be able to understand, okay, is that really a problem here, or is it just a sort of a coincidence that that's where this is happening? And I think there's good evidence to suggest that there's going to be plenty of opportunity here in certain areas to be able to improve that pedestrian safety. We also know that traffic congestion along Broad Street is fairly heavy, and particularly in certain times of the day. Having a traffic signal system that could potentially be coordinated with boundary partners could also really help alleviate that. And working in a coordinated and adaptive way, we can help improve that traffic flow. All right, next slide, please. So again, the benefits of some of the smart intersection technology. As I mentioned before, if we really go to the level of implementing the sensors at the intersections, we can do things like being able to, identify where conflicts occur, to seek out countermeasures that might be deployed to be able to solve those issues. We can look at jaywalking detection to try to understand, okay, well, why are people jaywalking? It's not necessarily that we can stop them with the technology. It's more about identifying where the problems are and trying to understand what some of the solutions might be to try to limit that activity, as we know that that is a highly dangerous scenario. We can do potentially pedestrian alerting through a variety of sources. If we detect pedestrians are crossing or about to cross when traffic is coming, there are opportunities to notify them of when there might be an alert, as well as drivers. In a future connected world, and connected vehicles are becoming, I guess, part of the future of the transportation system. These solutions will be able to provide data to the vehicles to understand when an impending collision could occur, to warn both the driver and the pedestrian. And so that's really a nice way to help keep both types of road users safer, and in a situation where they will not be in a position to be hurt. So adaptive signal timing is another capability that would come as a benefit. So this would be where the signals are reacting to what the sensors are picking up, and where they're identifying vehicles to effectively work like virtual sensors. Typically, that usually works with like loops that are in the pavement today. We'll use potentially cameras and other sensors, which is a lower cost and easier to maintain way to get that information and make it available. As well, traffic transit signal priority as well could be implemented here, so that if you have transit vehicles that are either running behind schedule or close to on-time schedule, they might extend, let's say, like a green signal to let them pass through to the signal, making them much more efficient as well. So other benefits on the traffic flow side of things, it gives the city folks who manage, I guess, the traffic signals themselves, the ability to remotely update the signals from a central system, so that they're very consistent and they can track and monitor what the impact of those signals or those signal timing plan updates are. And it will also improve their ability to communicate with those signals. So I know the system that they have in place today, that they are able to talk to some of the signals that are out there to understand how they're performing, but that there are a number of them that they cannot, I guess, communicate with directly due to some changes that occurred in infrastructure at City Hall some time ago, and just were never, I guess, updated to be able to support that capability. So the, I guess, information we get back from these systems will give us a fair amount of information about how to support the development of optimization for these timing plans as well. So it can look at how many vehicles are queued up and waiting at a particular time, what the speeds are, what the potential is to extend, either a side street phase or a through street phase to be able to maximize that capability. And vehicle counting and speed per lane information is also very valuable for being able to support other types of measurements of that traffic flow as well. Next slide, please. So our initial priorities, number one, to reestablish and upgrade, I guess, the signal system that's in place today. After a fair amount of review, and we're looking at the technology vendor, some of the traffic signal controllers that are in the field today are obsolescing and not able to support the communications and data exchange that needs to occur in order to support these technologies. So we'll be upgrading potentially those controllers to be able to communicate with that back office system, as well as putting in the wireless communications to support that as well. And the back-end IT infrastructure to support that back office system also. So that includes, of course, servers and access to those servers in a secure and usable way. We'll look at and continue to review smart intersection technologies. We have a couple of these programs in place today with Virginia DOT. We've deployed this technology down here in Blacksburg, as well as on our test track facility, and we're evaluating the quality and the reliability of the information that they provide. We'll use that information to help feed into what we would like to prescribe for this deployment. And finally, we'd like to integrate with data exchanges to support collecting this data to be able to look at other algorithmic development and where we can identify that other needs are and where they can be met through these types of systems. Next slide, please. Adaptive lighting, again, this just kind of shows a demonstration of where we have deployed adaptive lighting in parking lots down in Blacksburg. And so it shows that we can get significant energy savings by using the sensors that are on the lights to detect when there's the presence of, I guess, pedestrians or traffic moving about the environment. We can slowly bring up the intensity of the light to light the area much better, and then obviously make it much more safe and reduce the amount of energy that's required to maintain the system. It also helps in reducing, obviously in overnight situations where there's less movement about the environment, we can bring down those lights and leave them at a lower level, which reduces the overall light pollution that is scattered throughout the area. And supporting special events as well, whether that means things like street concerts or other, entertainment types of events. You can do things with the lights that will support, I guess, a very safe and interactive experience there as well. Next slide, please. Okay, on the community engagement side of things as well, I really kind of cover this in 2 stages. We have secured a domain for a portal that will be used to provide information to the public, and this is www.falleschurchsmartcity.com. Currently, it's in an inactive state. We do not have the content created for that yet, but we are proposing to add content like an about, what is this project about, what is the history, a roadmap, what we intend to develop and deploy, and when we intend to do that, how potentially the community can get involved, including providing their feedback, and then also what the individual projects are and any other news and updates. That will largely be an outward-facing, I guess, portal that the community can interact with as we begin to deploy the technologies and as they get present and in the field and people are beginning to experience them and the benefits that they may provide. We'll then have a more interactive engagement tool where we can get feedback directly from citizens in the community and to be able to have their feedback available as we move on to future phases of deployment. Next slide, please. That's all we had to talk about today. So that's a little bit of an update on where we are at today. We look forward to an opportunity to come back at your request whenever you'd like us to give you updates on how things are going. And at this point, I guess I'm ready to take any questions that you might have.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
I just wanted to conclude with that, Mayor, quickly, is to say this is sort of like our first time with you all, and you can see with the community engagement, the process, there'll be an iterative process, and so more to come. And so feedback now is great, and onward we go with deploying important resources.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for that fine presentation. Very informative, a lot going on there. Ms. Connolly?
Thanks, Mike, for that. That was so interesting, and we keep hearing about what's going to happen, and it's great to see so much is happening, and you have done so much work that we'll be able to bring to fruition. And I love the idea that it's going to continue evolving. You mentioned working with the schools, and I'm wondering, are you working with the transportation department? So there's 2 ways I could think that you should be dealing with the high school and secondary schools there. One is transportation and just the buses and cars and bikes and scooters and getting kids there and how that all fits into the whole entire development, which is unique, I think, in getting kids to school. And then the second piece is the high school is putting together and piloting a sustainability academy that is going to offer kids an opportunity to take classes in sustainability. And I think that the teachers that are piloting this and working on curriculum and different classes would be thrilled to work with you on that, just to find out if there are ways that they can academically partner.
Yeah, I'll take the latter question first. I think that are many STEM outreach types of activities that we can get involved with, both with those that are local to the area, but also in all of Falls Church. And so we look forward to those opportunities. And I know that several folks from our team have conducted those types of activities in the past. Everything from going out to elementary classes and helping to explain how this technology works when they see it and they can point to it in their own environment. It really kind of helps bring it alive. So we look forward to those opportunities. And yes, I think we have had participation. Cindy, if you can help remind me who we had in the meetings that are sitting in, it's escaping me right now.
Sure. Our prime contact has been Kristen Michael, COO.
That's right.
And that way she can connect us with the academic component and the transportation. And so she's sort of in that upfront steering committee. And so it's been a very collaborative process before. And in fact, this gives me a great segue, thank you, Ms. Connolly, to note that this presentation will also be made to the school board with an educational academic twist to it, and that'll be March 22nd. So we'll do a briefing to the school board then. It'll be their first full exposure, but I know Ms. Michael's been keeping them informed.
All right, Mr. Snyder.
Sure, thank you very much. Cindy, could you remind us of the geographic scope of this project? Because I like what I'm hearing, that it's beyond the west, Falls Church West development area, extending into Haycock Road and down on Route 7. That's encouraging to hear, but I wanted to make sure I do understand the geographic scope.
Yes, indeed. So the core, of course, was that 40-acre redevelopment area that we've described, and the initial focus when we went to the General Assembly. But it's not confined to that, because when you're doing the living lab and, let's say, the traffic signals, one thing I've learned is obviously it's just not the traffic signals serving here. We need to feed it down Route 7 where there's conflicts, towards Tyson's, and so forth. So it will expand out. It just needs to connect to that core scope and within sort of our budget planning area. But a traffic signal or adaptive lighting doesn't live on its own. And one thing I will highlight, because council's aware of our LED light conversion street light CIP project, we've also brought that factor in. So as Zach and Lionel are working on our city CIP and that adaptive lighting concepts, we're consistent with what the technology is and how we can utilize this project's resources to benefit that, so we're not creating conflicts but complementing each other.
I guess what I'm thinking is extending this project as far down on Route 7 as we can possibly legitimately extend it would be something that our citizens would want, considering the extent, frankly, of law breaking and conflicts we're seeing on Route 7. So that would be important.
I think that's very true, because like your timing and those congestion conflicts pieces that Mike was talking to, that timing is all of the sequence. And I know Zach has been working with our traffic and signal group to identify all our 25, 30 intersections and what are the priorities, and growing it out so that we have the right controller servers and everything. And that's about the extent of my technology understanding of that, but we can
I'll add that when we address a system like that where it takes a certain expertise to run and you're having to monitor critical infrastructure, you don't want to run a small little one over here with part of your system and another one over here that has older parts of your system.
Right.
Something like that we're going to have to address kind of all at once, we believe. And again, we're still in the planning phases, so we'll work that through. But we would like to make it so that it's a maintainable and operable system without adding a lot of extra work for the city. And so that's the primary goal.
I think we could all agree with that.
Yeah.
Secondly, the technologies you've listed all have kind of been around for a while. Like, there are parking garages out there with the little lights that tell you where you can park, and there have been theoretically optimized intersections, again, more in theory than in practice. So I guess within the site itself, I'm still looking for something that's really new here. Certainly your automated bus going back and forth to Mosaic is something frankly brand new, at least for us in this area. So I'm looking for something more than I've seen on site, but very pleased with the notion that some of what I'll call the more traditional modern technology, if I could use that terminology, will be worked through and potentially affect a much broader area than just that area in the yellow there on the screen. So those are a couple of the points. I may have a couple more questions in a minute or two, but those were some initial comments. Thanks.
I'm glad you asked that. If I might comment on that. So it's a good observation. I would say that the technologies that we are focusing on first, again, we're trying to be faithful to, I guess, what was suggested in the initial funding request. If there's funding left over after addressing these, then we absolutely want to use this environment as a springboard to attract additional deployment of other new technologies. And so things like automated package delivery, right, and other micro transit kinds of solutions, or would really be able to feed off this underlying technology fabric that we're putting in place. And so if we can do that, then I think that we're going to have a lot of opportunity to continue to keep the resources flowing to use this as, I guess, that living lab testbed environment that was originally envisioned.
Right. Thank you very much.
Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. All of this is really cool and exciting, so thank you for spending time with us. I might have missed this, but is there a proposed launch date on when we might see some of this stuff go live?
So we're working through, right now we have a planning grant that VTRC has issued to us. We are working as diligently and rapidly as we can and working through some of the, I'll call it the contracts committee types of issues. These are the agreements that need to be put in place before we can finalize that phase 1 statement of work. And so I believe it's probably our initial timeline, it would be about a month out. We would start to see that statement of work being finalized, and so it can be reviewed by the executive committee and others who need to review it. Now that's contingent upon us being able to get all the agreements in place in time that would be required to execute that. And so those are a little out of our hands. So I hesitate to give you an actual date of when this is going to kick off. I'm thinking it's on the order of a couple of months, probably more so than 6 months or a year.
And
Sorry, I can't be more explicit. Yeah.
We need to wait for kind of the economic development project to be well underway and done before a lot of it can be done, or can it be done concurrently?
Well, I think, again, if we go back and look at the different technologies, I think signal systems, right, if we're going to really do if that's what we choose to do, is to upgrade the entire city signal system, then that could be addressed almost immediately with areas outside of where the physical development is occurring. And then as the physical development matures in the area, then we would, obviously implement those technologies there as well. So even within that, there's going to be a little bit of phasing to try to match up to what that development timeline is. So not everything has to wait, is what I'm trying to say.
In fact, Mike mentioned this in the part of his early presentation, but having the developers as part of the stakeholder group has been important, because obviously we have West Falls at one stage progressing now, and then WMATA, going in for their zoning, different phases, but we want to make sure the technology and the conduits and the power are consistent. So we're working now to make sure the specs are provided to the developers so that we don't undo and, tear up pavement or whatever. So there'll be multiple phases, I guess, as we work on each component, but the goal is to keep it moving, because of course the General Assembly wants to see delivery and outcome of the funding.
Got it. So out of all the different technologies you talked about, I think parking in particular was exciting for me, and not the version that I think you see at the mall today where you can drive up to their garage and already know how many spaces there are, but really the version where you potentially have one app and you be able to look across the city and know where there is parking available to minimize the circling around that happens. I think that's been done elsewhere. I think in San Francisco, I actually experienced demand-based pricing. Based on the amount of people looking for spaces, the rates go up. And I don't think we have that issue in Falls Church yet. But I think we've had various traffic and parking consultants come in and tell us that we actually have the right number of parking spaces right now. The challenge is helping people find those spaces. And that's where I think smart parking could really help. So imagine if you had a map of the city that showed here's all the available spaces based on magnetometers and sensors in the ground, where there's available spaces, where there's occupied spaces, and just being able to reserve it and pay for it automatically. That would just cut down on so much idling that happens in our city. And so seeing that piloted, I think, at this site, and then with hopefully potential to expand elsewhere, could be really, really cool.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It would be really nice to be able to tie maybe some of where all those parking spaces are that are available, that are maybe not right next to where I want to go, but tie that to a micro mobility solution that might be nearby. So maybe I find a scooter or a bike share that I can get that last mile. I think that can really help utilize what is there and available and get me to actually the final door that I want to be in, So it's a good point.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Leon?
Yes, thank you so much. This was very interesting. The two questions. The first one is, when we take a look at the page titled Proposed Smart City Applications, and there's an allocation of money put out there, right? That total, the 10 million. How flexible is that, or is that really fixed because that's the parameters of the grant?
So my understanding, and again, this came to us as a grant that we're still figuring out some of the parameters, is that these were some initial targets that were put on these numbers without a whole lot of investigation of what it was really going to take. And so I think that there is a fair amount of flexibility, more so in some than others. I would say,
Okay.
like roadway development's probably going to take really what's there. And I think the other ones kind of depends upon the scope, right? So we could scope larger or smaller let's say if we want to fit in another technology that we think would be super beneficial in the area. We could scope down maybe how many of those we deploy and then make room funding and wise for a second or a third or fourth application to be brought in to consume the other funding. So this is where we want to really get down to understanding, community needs at a deeper level. And the city's been great at sharing the information that they have with us thus far. And we've been doing as much digging as we can do with the available sources that are there. So I think there'll be plenty of opportunity probably for, feedback from the community, and we'll look to marry up what we do here with what perceived needs are.
Okay, that's great to know that those are targets and it's driven by input, qualitative and quantitative. Now, second question is, when we talk about community engagement along this the grant project review approach, there's 5 boxes on this chart. Is it intended that engagement is really going to feed into the working group priorities, or is it more towards the charter, right? Just curious. Ideally, it's great to include it as to obtain it as part of the charter definition process, as well as kind of the vision process, but you've split that between 2 boxes. So I was just curious where this community engagement threads in as input into which box on that page.
Yeah, and I think that there's an initial process that we've gone through, and that is engagement with our partners and stakeholders. And we have, sought out the input that is available from community engagement resources thus far, and then use that as part of, once the working groups were together, to then develop the vision. And then ultimately, we want it to be part of that box on the far right, and that's the evaluation side of things, right? So that we can reach out to the community and have that be part of the evaluation of what has been implemented.
Okay, so it's really 3 out of those 5 boxes is kind of getting the heavy hit of that engagement.
Yep,
okay.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Snyder?
Sure. Let me go back to a couple questions a couple minutes ago and comments and try to focus them more. Microtransit is something that I'm particularly interested in for the City of Falls Church, because we've got people having to drive 6,000-pound vehicles to go a half mile to get their groceries. So there's something that we could do. And so I'm very interested in automated microtransit, for example, to give people that may not be able to, for whatever reason, able to use the micro things like bike share and scooters and other things like that. So how can we effectively help those people get around and do what they need to do without having to use their cars to do that? The second area is, and this is another coordination issue, we're in a advanced sort of study mode for the bus rapid transit on Route 7. And I'm particularly interested in your work tying in with that, not just as a matter of structure, but rather what can this particular project do to enable a bus rapid transit system to function well in the City of Falls Church with the kind of traffic that we have and the inability to give it a dedicated lane. And it's not just signal preemption, but rather how can we use technology to make that interface between bus rapid transit and all of our other transportation needs in the city work to the maximum degree possible? And that's kind of a fairly challenging issue, but I think will be fundamental, A, to the success of the project, and B, public acceptance of bus rapid transit. And the last thing we want is a system that begins and ends outside of the city and gives us no advantages of a true regional bus rapid transit system. Do you understand where I'm coming with that, Mike? And Cindy, if you could just help him understand that, because there may be a real synergy here that's immediate and widely beneficial to ourselves in the region. How do we make that bus rapid transit system work maximally in the driving and pedestrian environment of the city of Falls Church to maximize both safety and official movements of all highway users?
Yeah, certainly can do that. I know, as you know, Mike is presented to NVTA for that sort of technology side of things, but we can make sure we've looped VTTI in with MVTC and the next phase of study that we're doing for the rapid bus, which has a stop, which we've mentioned to Mike and the team, at this development location.
Right. Thank you.
All right. I've got one or two questions or comments. Thank you for the fine work you've done. I do like the idea, to the maximum extent possible, having solutions that will benefit the entire city, not just a portion of it. The signalization or those sort of things, parking that might be implemented citywide, I think certainly would have the most support from myself. I do also like the notion of having, some kind of project, some component of this that has some zing or some excitement of something really that is, as echoing Mr. Snyder's comments, really unique, maybe pushing the envelope a little bit as far as transportation, parking, lighting, et cetera. I don't know what those things are because I'm not in the loop that much with that, but I do think it would be nice to have at least some portion of this that would draw attention, regionally or potentially nationally to this part of town to say, hey, this is a really cool thing we've come up with. We're implementing it here. As sort of a cutting edge program. So I don't know what those things might be, but I would just ask you might give some consideration to some subcomponent of what you're doing that could be considered really on the new edge, the forefront of what might be to come in these areas. But otherwise, I guess I would just say to you, thank you once again. There's a lot of great stuff here. We're very excited to get this grant and to have you all helping us with it. So thank you. We look forward to speaking with you again and hearing updates and watching the progress, but we really appreciate the work today.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and other council members. Thank you for your attention. We look forward to working with you and addressing this group again.
All right, we look forward to it as well. And the last item on the agenda, or at least last major item, is library hours. Mr. Shields, I don't know if you want to start this or someone else.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. And Cindy, I do have just a little 3 slides on library hours just to provide some information up on the screen. And I do want to note also, I believe that we have our library director, that is Jenny Carroll, who's on the call as well. Let me just check that. There she is. Yes. So we were asked to add this to the agenda and wanted to do that, and I don't have a very a super in-depth presentation on it. I have emailed some information that the library director provided me and that had been shared with the library board for the council's reading just prior to this meeting. And kind of the key thing for discussion is we are talking about the reduction of hours to 54 hours per week for the library. And just by way of introduction, I do want to just note that, in terms of city services, I think the library is one of our most loved city services, or city programs. And that's reciprocated, I think, by the city staff in terms of their dedication and love for the patrons and the kids and all the young people who use the library. And I think everyone is extremely pleased with the new library and how it works for the public and for staff. Over the past many years, we've really built incredibly dedicated staff who are innovative, service-oriented, creative, and I just have a great appreciation for that and appreciation for the leadership of Jenny and her team. So the reason for the reduction of the hours really gets down to the staffing levels for the library, and this is a long-standing concern. We had a study in 2013 that did identify understaffing as an area of concern back then. Since 2013, we have only added new programs. Obviously, we've added the square footage of the library, but we've not added staff. really since the recession. And during the recession years, we cut library staff. And really, we've been getting by a sort of a staff approach to everything of just trying to do it all. And in 2021, we did take a look at a staffing tool, staffing analysis tool that's provided by the Library of Virginia. And we used that analysis, and it reaffirmed the staffing shortages that we have, kind of with numbers. And that was presented to the library board, really in the context of sort of the big strategic thinking about the library, where we want to go with our library programs, but also in the context of the 2023 budget, which we're all working very hard on in terms of working through the best options that we'll present to the city council on the budget. But the discussion at that library board meeting was, a concern about sustaining our programs and also sustaining our staff, avoiding staff burnout, loss of valued staff that are so critical for all the programs that we run. After that discussion, the library board then supported a change to the hours that we've put up on the screen here. The library board's approach on this was to they followed the staff recommendation, but they targeted the hours at the most popular hours when the library is most used by our patrons. They also wanted, in terms of thinking about strategically how to use resources in the best way, wanted to protect our material collections and the offerings that are available for patrons and the library. And they also wanted to protect our programs. And so the hours of reductions was viewed as the most efficient, targeted area in order to sustain the programs and the staff that we have. A last note, this is a phenomenon that is happening throughout the region, throughout the country, in fact. I think Jenny has mentioned to me, I think nationwide, the average library is open 43 hours a week, and we're sustaining at 54. But Cindy, if you go to the last slide, around our region, immediately near us, the Mary Riley Stiles Library is the most accessible to the public, open 7 days a week, even with these changes of hours, and open more hours per week than any of the other nearby libraries. So that is some information just on the background on it, and we'd be happy to answer any questions and have a discussion on it. And we do anticipate that we'll have more options and sort of explore strategies with council in the context of the FY23 budget.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Shields. Let's open it up to questions and comments from council. All right, no questions or comments. So it looks like, there we go. Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. So my concern, and after fielding some inquiries from the community, is really around, I think people were just surprised. And so it's really more on the process. And so as you said, I think council in the future probably wanted to be briefed on what those options were and have a chance to weigh in. And I think many of us in the community included were just surprised that the decision was made by the board and then it was communicated a week later. So more feedback going forward.
I think that's good feedback.
And then my second question / comment is, I specifically remember when we were discussing the library CIP project, is thinking about operating costs. And I think going forward, kind of the discipline is making sure that when we build new capital, we also make sure that the operating costs are commensurate with that, so that we don't just build the capital and not take care of the operating needs. And I specifically remember discussing this during the library CIP project to make sure that we had the staff and other operating budgets kind of there. How much of this is related to the new space and how much of it is a problem that we've had even before that? And should some of those CIP dollars gone towards funding operating?
Let me defer that question to the director. Jenny?
Sure. So in terms of staffing costs, as Wyatt mentioned, this has been a longstanding problem since I think prior to 2013, but in 2013, the master plan was completed and that was noted by the consultants. So yes, the building is bigger, and yes, there are increased operating costs in terms of other things because we have more bathrooms, that type of thing. I wouldn't directly relate it to the building getting bigger. It certainly is what's going to happen is more people will also come as well. So we have always been a very highly used library. So up until COVID, 500,000 circulation. And then in terms of visits and programs, that's always gone up over the years since the recession, excuse me. So I wouldn't draw a correlation between the building opening, the new building and the staffing. Staffing has been an issue.
Mr. Snyder?
Sure. So as we're approaching this budget season, I'm sure we're going to get requests for a lot of new employees across many departments, and our job is going to be to balance those needs with other compensation needs, with the ability of our citizens and willingness to pay for all this. So I just hope that there's some understanding that this is going to have to be balanced against many other needs. I am amazed at the suggested number of library employees comes very close to the suggested number of police officers we ought to have. So I'm frankly amazed at the number, and so I want to be responsive, but I'm going to ask some more questions about this. Are we really staffing in a way that is the most efficient way? Are those hours really the hours that our citizens are using the library, as opposed to, we know it's in essence become a regional facility. So the questions that, so I'll have a lot of questions, and please understand, it doesn't indicate lack of support for the library, but it does indicate the need to look at all of the demands that we're going to have from many departments, and compensation needs that have to be balanced again against the interests of the taxpayers. So all I'm suggesting is the more work and more justification here than I've seen so far, but I'm anxious to be responsive to the extent that we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Duncan?
Well said, Mr. Snyder, by many budget wars through the years. And thank you to the Vice Mayor for her comments about the process. Fools rush in where angels fear to tread. So I'm sorry, but I have to say, we really try hard to put ourselves in the seats of those whom we fund, whether it's the police or public works or library, and we have to make some very difficult calls, to not give people as much staff as we understand that they probably need, because we just can't do everything. We're a small city. And I guess my ask going forward is is what Mr. Snyder said, which is to understand that that is the case, and that when we make decisions about resources, that we do it in a planful way, not in a way that ends up being a communications surprise. I mean, frankly, I'm in the communications line, and if the line had been Falls Church Library, Leeds region and the hours open, we'll trim back in order to weather a tough period of time, that would have been a different kind of story than the one that was sprung on us, which is library board votes to close library hours, to curtail library hours, which is not a good message. And it's not a complete message. So I hope as we tackle the new budget that we'll be able to meet all reasonable needs and provide tax relief and do all the important things that we want to do with the understanding and cooperation of those with whom we're trying to work. So I look forward to those discussions, and I do come to them with an open mind, understanding that we do have pressing needs in other areas of our civic endeavor that we do have to attend to. Thanks.
So I've got a couple questions if others don't have any. First off, so let me just try to understand the problem. Is the problem that you don't have the money to pay people and therefore you have to cut back hours? Is the problem that people don't want to work, they've quit, they moved on, and so you don't have enough people to work? What's the nature of the problem? I'm not sure I fully understand.
So the nature of the problem is that we don't have enough staff to cover the number of hours that we were open. So when we did our staffing analysis, so a full-time person, doesn't work 40 hours a week. You have to factor in certain deductions. So sick leave, vacation, attendance and other activities, city activities, mandatory training, that sort of thing. So then you build in what's called a relief factor, and that's where the Library of Virginia provided some information on how to do that, because we had always been feeling, or library staff had been feeling, why do we feel like we're constantly treading water or underwater in terms of providing services and hours open? So for example, if somebody calls out sick, and this just happened last Monday, I have a youth services staff of 5 people, and 3 of the full-time people were sick. And we had to provide story time and cover the service desk. So we had to move people around so that we could make that all happen. And that was based on 59 hours. So the analysis that we did determined that we are actually not adequately staffed to provide the hours that we want to provide and the services that we want to provide. So it's not that people are not working or don't want to work, or that we have lost anybody. We have not been adequately staffed for quite a few years.
So let me just try to understand this. Sure. So basically the Virginia library people told you recently, in the past month or so, hey, you know what, you need to have 5 people manning these desks, but we only had 4. So we're not adequately staffed. I mean, the stuff you guys were doing, let's say 2 months ago, which seemed perfectly fine to a casual observer like myself, those people, those weren't, according to state guidelines or some kind of recommendations, aren't enough people. And so now the people that you have are working the same hours. There's just more people in the building, or you want to have more people in the building at one time than you did previously? So
I guess to correct a couple of things. So the Library of Virginia didn't tell us to do this. Management team have been thinking about a staffing analysis because we had this feeling of, why do we feel like we're constantly underwater, that we cannot meet the needs, that we are stressed out, that people are becoming burnt out, what is causing this feeling? So I had asked the Library of Virginia, do you have anything out there that provides a staffing analysis? And so the staffing analysis piece of paper was actually given to me when I first became director, because this has been going on for a long time. We got to do that in November because it became part of the long list of things that we have to accomplish. So including moving the library twice, COVID happening, there's just been a lot of other things. And the attitude of the library staff is always, we can make it work. We can make it work, and we can make it work. And so that nothing was mandated. We had just wanted to have the data to know what is going on. And what the data tells us is the reason why we had been having this feeling is because we're understaffed. So we would just keep adding more things on. And when we looked at, what are some of the ways that we can sort of cut back, one of the ways is hours. In terms of programs and services right now, I believe we're providing the baseline. Of course, we would love to increase what we're doing. And of course, we would like to have more hours. We just don't have enough staff to go around to do everything that we want to do and everything that the public wants us to do. We have limits.
But basically what's happened going back, let's say 6 months or whenever, I don't know when the period of time, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, everyone was staffing it, but at a lesser amount. So, from certain hours, instead of having 10 people, and I'm just making these numbers up, maybe they're not accurate, instead of having 10 people in the room, in the building working, you had 9 or 8. And so the building was open, and it was open longer because those 2 extra people, maybe they worked the late shift. And so they helped fill up the hours to make it a longer work day or longer library hour day. But since you've done this analysis or received this analysis or had these communications, you feel to lower the stress of employees to have greater staffing for a shorter period of time. The same number of work hours are occurring. They're just occurring on a more condensed time frame. Is that right?
So I guess, can you say that?
Well, what I'm saying is basically, let me just make a number up. Let's say that people work, there's 40 employees and they average 20 hours a week. So there's 800 man or woman hours worked a week. Before that was spread out over, 60 hours. And now you want to spread those same people over 50 hours or whatever it is. Is that fair to say? That's essentially what you're trying to do or what you propose to do or what you have done. Like the number of hours being worked are not going down. But you're basically working the same exact number of hours collectively in a week. You just want more people at any given time because it's stressful or you feel like maybe the quality is not there or whatever it might be. That's what you're seeking. Is that just so I can understand the situation?
Yes, we have the same number of people working the same number of hours. By reducing the number of hours that we're open, we are able to adequately staff service desks and adequately staff programming and services. Prior to that, we were spread very thin. So for example, if anybody calls out sick, we have to scramble to find somebody to sit on a service desk and then provide programs and other services. So by condensing the number of hours that we're open per week, and we also looked at the data in terms of how many people were coming into the building at certain times. So when we looked at the number of hours, 54 hours would cover, and we looked at the number of hours and where we would provide that, one of the factors was when are people coming into the building? The other factor was consistency. We would like to have consistency in a schedule, hence opening at 10 a.m. in the morning every day, so that sticks in people's minds. They can become habituated to that. It's not a different schedule every day. Does that?
Yeah, so basically, and for those people who would say, hey, you were a 4-star library or whatever it was, 5-star library, I love the services I got there 6 months ago, 2 months ago, whenever the last time they went there before you cut back hours, and thought, wow, it's great. I love the library, the way it's operated. Your response would be, it's really stressing us out here. We're scrambling too much. Is that what the response would be to that? People who are satisfied with the quality of the library, didn't feel that it impacted customer service from their perspective, at least several months ago. Would you say?
I'm ecstatic that it didn't affect customer service, and I think we always provide great customer service. So we would continue to provide, the programs and services that they saw 2 months ago, 3 months ago, 4 months ago. That's the baseline of services. It would be the number of hours that we would be reducing. So we would not be reducing programs at this time. We want to maintain that level of programming.
Got it. Beth Conley, Vice Mayor, or Ms. Conley.
Thanks, Mayor Charter. And thank you, Ms. Carroll, for your presentation. I just also want to mention that one of the things that stands out to me about the library is that in this time that the City of Falls Church has had so many staffing shortages everywhere, you have maintained your staff. Your staff have not left the library. They have worked through the pandemic. They've worked through the move in the library. They have put in extra hours as needed because they're really loyal to the library. And I think that's really worth noting, is that when more work is added to their plates and there are 6 people in the library when there really should be 7, or 8 people when there really should be 10, they're just covering and doing what they need to do because of the culture that you've built there at the library. So I appreciate that culture. And I also appreciate that you want to make sure that your staff who are sticking around and are not leaving in a time when a lot of other staff are finding other places to go, that the work that they're being given is work that is adequate to be done within a 40-hour work week.
Yes.
Okay, other comments or questions? So I think on this issue, maybe more to come. I think there's certainly people who would like to see, the hours restored or hours increased. I know that they may compare favorably to branches of other systems, but other systems have other branches, so that system-wide, their hours are, I imagine, substantially more than Falls Churches are, even though there may be one branch that has similar hours to our branch. I'm going to let Ms. Hardy have the last word, and then we'll move on to the consent items.
Thank you. So circling back to kind of where I started, and maybe as part of the FY23 budget discussions, Wyatt, I guess I'm more interested in looking at what those original several options that the library board deliberated on. So the hours versus cutting programs, and maybe there was some other option. I'd just like to dive more deeply into that, and we don't need to do that tonight, especially if we have an option to restore the hours, and cut programs, or some other option and lever that we can use.
All right, thank you. That'll be the final word. Thank you, Ms. Carroll. We all deeply appreciate the library, and it's one of our great loves here in the city. So thank you for your fine work, and we look forward to further conversations.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's quickly go on through future consent items.
So, Council, there are 3 items that are here for a preview with a request to schedule for the consent for next week. And one is a purchase authorization for a loader. This is a piece of equipment that we use to load mulch into vehicles or salt into our salt spreaders. It's really kind of a crucial piece of equipment for the operations of the operations yard. So that's a DPW purchase. Cindy, if we could just go back to the list, I'll kind of go pretty briskly and then see if there are any questions. So that contract amount is in the amount of $206,000 for that piece of equipment. Then the last 2, the first is a renewal of the authorization for the city manager to execute Vtti grant agreements. Council approved that about 5 years ago, and apparently VDOT's rules are that it needs to be re-upped every 5 years, so that the governing body has designated the staff member who can execute those grant agreements. And then the last is the charging stations for the school buses. We've got 2 school buses that are coming to us through a Department of Environmental Quality grant, and DVP requires a participation agreement before they install the equipment. One other thing that will have to come to council, unfortunately, as well, because it's not yet prepared, but we have to grant an easement for the equipment the DVP is putting in, and Carol is working out the language on those easements. Those are the 3 things on consent.
All right, Ms. Connolly.
Just a quick question on the charging stations. How many buses will be able to be charged there?
I think the intent is that under this agreement, we can expand it. And so it sort of lays out sort of the program. But as of right now, we will have 2, but it can be expanded in the future.
Okay. And that is all going in the property yard area.
That's right.
So is the infrastructure able to be moved at some point if we say, well, now we don't want the buses to be here because we want to do something else here? Or is it permanently in that spot? And what's the lifespan of it?
I don't know all of those answers. I will say this, however, just as a matter of property rights, DVP's first version of this agreement says that they put it in there and they have a perpetual easement, forever. And so Carol has worked it to say, no, you don't get it forever. If the program stops, then you lose your easement. And if the city, moves its bus stations to a different location, then, the easement goes away. So she's protected the city and those types of standard things. DVP always comes to the table with, everything to the max for them.
And can other vehicles use these charging stations? Or are they just for buses? What if we got ourselves,
I'll have to get back with you on that. I believe this is a school bus program, and part of the deal is that it's also part of energy storage and load management. So it's a two-way flow of the electrons. They keep the buses charged, but then at times of peak need, the school buses are actually putting electrons into the grid to, on a hot summer day to help fund, run air conditioners. So that's part of the agreement.
Okay.
So that's
Thank you.
kind of a longer response, but could we put our dump trucks onto it? Right now, I think this is a school bus program.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Shields. Ms. Leon.
Sorry, thanks, Mayor Tartar. One question, Wyatt. I was just looking at this loader. The fiscal impact, it says that it's going to be funded with underspending in the public works budget, operating budget. Is that basically going to close out or bring to zero the underspending, this purchase? Or is there more left over?
So that is the way that we will. This is a critical piece of equipment that we need to have, and so I think Zach is really kind of in a position that we needed to get it. As always, we look at other options of how we could get it. Could we lease it, etc. And purchasing it is, per our purchasing director, is by far the most cost-effective way to have this piece of equipment. As we're working through our fiscals for this year, we may come back to council at a later date to seek to use other funding to pay for this. But right now, absent any other council action, we would be able to cover it through underspending. And where that underspending is from the staff shortages that we've had at DPW operations.
Oh, for the operate. Oh, okay. Yep. Okay. Yep.
All right.
I know what the loader looks like. Yep. It's expensive. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So unless there's anything else on the consent items, let's move on to council schedule and other comments that might not have been made this evening. Is there anything anybody wants? Ms. Hiscott? How'd the game go?
Game was great. Meridian won, I think, 65-33 was the final score. So we headed on Thursday to the state championship. Quite
All
exciting.
right, congratulations.
Fantastic community event. My question and desire to have on the either discussion at the mayor's meeting, and it will certainly come up next Monday at our meeting, is with regard to the Insight property that's scheduled to be wrapped, fenced this week, and the concern of our of the Clarendons of the taxes with regard to the curb cut having not happened before the building is being fenced off, and how it's going to impact being able to get to their business. We know when we talked and voted on Insight, I think that was not too long after I started on council. That was obviously something that was very important to many of us on council, that we took care of our existing unique local businesses as we moved forward. And maybe there's an update I'm just not familiar with, or we're further along in the process, but that has request has been made of me to find that out. And so I don't know if that's a tonight issue or if you can update on Wednesday, but it is an immediate concern for our local businesses.
It is an immediate concern, and we've been talking with the the business community in general about it, as well as specific businesses. And there will be a gap of time in which before the signal is installed that will allow for left turn movements into Park Place. And so we are trying to shorten that time as much as possible. But we also will be using the Kaiser garages will be available. And so we are promoting those as an option for people who are coming from Arlington County or traveling south on Washington Street, that they can park there at the Kaiser garage until that median cut allows easier access into the city public lot.
So will that, I know we have signage that we saw, I think it was last EDC meeting, but is there going to be, the mobile large signs or anything promoting the Kaiser as alternative parking, or how can we best address the gap?
Let me talk with our EDO staff. I think what we're envisioning is the signage, but yeah, and public relations. But maybe the big orange signs would be helpful as well. We certainly want to do everything we can to let the public know.
Yeah, I was just thinking that those are pretty effective. The ones we had when we were advertising DPW staff openings as you came in on Broad Street from the Tyson's end, maybe something like that, promoting additional parking supports for downtown. Just one idea. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Conley.
I just wanted to talk a little bit briefly about the budget calendar and the work sessions that we have set up between the budget presentation and the final. And we do not have to talk about it right now because it's 10:46, but I would like to make sure that we're looking at maximizing our time. And one of the suggestions that came out of the Budget and Finance Committee meeting is that we should have the school board do the presentation with Mr. Shields when he does the original budget presentation, but that the city council should really take a look at all the materials that the school board has put together as they went through their budget, which may answer a lot of our questions so that we don't have to have a full work session with a full school board there. That may save all of us time sitting in meetings. But I'm sure they're available to answer any questions that we do have, so I don't want to cut that off. I just want to see if there's a way we can schedule those sessions better.
Thank you. Letty?
Wyatt, I think we've all gotten the emails about Lincoln and requests for pedestrian work. So I think splitting into two issues. One is the crosswalk in particular at Dorchester and Great Falls that goes into Lincoln Park. And then separate, I think, is a whole stream of emails about just what's happening on Lincoln. And I know that you've responded to some of them. Can you make sure that we talk about it either in a separate meeting or have an email to council and kind of what is our plan for that and how can we respond? Because I think the issue is there's not a great city program that takes care of things like this. It's not an NTC project per se. And so I want to make sure that it gets taken care of and we are responsive to the citizen concerns.
So the Dorchester situation, that crossing, I think, is something that we can run through NTC and talking with staff. We think we can probably do that rather efficiently. The bigger Lincoln project, that is in the CIP. That's, and so we're going to follow that process of going through preliminary engineering and engagement with the community. And that will be, the process by which we'll engage on the bigger Lincoln issues.
Can you help us make sure that we respond to everyone who's written into us with that plan?
Yeah, we'll have to do an inventory of those, and
maybe the clerks can help us make sure we've gotten all the comments.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, just to follow up on Letty's comments, I think why it'd be very important to put together a comprehensive package of how we're responding. There's also that question about, I guess we're doing some repaving there, and why aren't we doing more when we're repaving? So I want to be responsive. There are a significant number of citizens that have raised these questions. So if you can help us, Wyatt, be responsive to our citizens in a comprehensive way, this element here, that element there, we're really listening. Here's what we can do now. Here's the plan to do it in the future, will be tremendously helpful. I don't want our citizens to feel that they're not being listened to and that they have to come and take time out of their schedules to try to make the points that we've already seen and we're in the process of responding to. So I think there's a real communications issue that we want to do here to respond. That just really following up, I have the same concern Letty did. Thanks.
Okay. Any final words from anyone? If not, why don't we adjourn this meeting and see each other, I'm sure, coming up here very soon. Everyone have a great night. Thank you all. We'll see you all
Thank you,
soon.
Council.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
Council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.